Okay, ready? Good evening, everyone. I will call the Dublin City Council meeting of Monday, December 2nd to order. Ann, could you please call the roll?
Mayor Peterson.
Here.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms. Here. Mr. Keenan.
Here.
Ms. Aludo.
Here.
Ms. Fox.
Here.
Mr. Bosa.
Here.
Mr. Reiner.
Here. Jane, would you lead us in the pledge?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone. I understand our chambers is quite packed, not only in this room, but out in the hallway, and perhaps there are even some people outside that aren't able to get inside the building. Dana, we're live streaming the meeting, though, aren't we? So if people want to go home and turn on the computer, they can watch right along.
Yes, sir, we are, yes.
Okay. Generally, in our agenda that we have set up, the item that I believe is generating so much support is the issue with the AEP discussion that is found in the other portion of our agenda, which is after a healthy agenda that we have to get through that I would say we probably wouldn't even get to till about 9 o'clock. But we're going to move that issue up very first on the agenda so we can talk about that issue now. That's the most popular thing I've said all of it. There you go. I should pull a George Costanza and just leave right now while everybody's still happy. So we're going to try to keep this as orderly as possible. Our intention, the intention of this council is always, has been and will be to not only allow for participation of our citizens, but encourage it and listen. So, and not only are we listening to you, but we're hearing what you're saying. So we're going to try to get through this in as orderly and in an efficient way as we possibly can, while also trying to be respectful of each other and the time that this is taking, and not repeating ourselves either from this council or from the podium. So the way that we're going to do this is Dana is going to present the staff's position, sort of how we've gotten where we are, and then we'll take the next step after that. I think it is really important to remember, and I know it has generated a fair amount of, we've seen a lot of email traffic and a lot of communication from people. I think it's really important to remember what role this body plays in this process. And if you aren't familiar with it, it isn't something that would seem to be logical or make all that much sense. But with AEP and where they locate their utilities is regulated by the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. And where they place their power lines and things of like the issues that are being raised here are generally controlled by the Power Siting Board, which is completely separate and apart from us. We don't have any authority over them. It's actually quite the opposite. And we can appeal to them, and we can appear before them, and we can attempt to influence them. But the decision maker on these issues is not necessarily this council. I think it is really important to remember the reason that AEP and our staff and this council is even engaged in this conversation is to attempt to come to an agreeable resolution with good faith on everybody's side. So as long as we keep all those things in mind and we go through this in an orderly fashion, I think we're going to be able to get through all the issues, get everybody's concerns addressed, and we'll make the best decisions that we can when we're done with all of that. So with that, Dana?
Well, good evening, members of council. Thank you, Mayor, for those opening remarks. And yes, just to reiterate, our goal as staff has been to try to work proactively with AEP. We've been doing this since 2017, where the dialogue went from dual circuitry to single circuitry, and there's been public meetings held by AEP, notices regarding trying to frame options relative to this proposed transmission line in preparation for the Ohio Power Siting Board hearings and so forth. So we've been working with them to try to understand what it is they're trying to do, and also working with them to try to figure out how might the city be able to help mitigate the impacts of the proposed line. So that's really been our position, is trying to understand the different mitigative steps we might be able to take, be those routes, be those burial options, be those whatever we can figure out. And there's been a lot of iterations and discussion and so forth about that. What we thought we would do tonight is start off, staff is going to brief, Megan O'Callahan, our Director of Public Works, is going to brief this tonight. This is where we as staff are right now and what we are proposing, and we have some recommendations at the end of this. AEP is also present here. I'll let Megan make those introductions to answer questions. They are not going to be presenting tonight because we feel, this is the situation that we are in, to try to recommend to council the alternatives to try to minimize impact and do the best that we feel that we can do and try to get some feedback from you on that. I also want to say thank you to all the residents for their involvement in all the different meetings, public hearings, and so forth, be it AEP's conducted or we've conducted or jointly conducted. It's been very helpful in all the emails to understand what's important to you all, and our goal here is to try to be responsive to that as much as possible in as responsible a way as we can possibly do it. So with that, I'm going to hand it right over to Megan and let her brief you on where we think we are.
Good evening, members of council. I'd like to start the presentation with a brief recap of the discussion that we had during the November 18th City Council work session.
Excuse me, is your mic not hearing you?
You couldn't hear me?
That's better.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
So I'd like to start the presentation with a brief recap of the discussion that we had during the November 18th City Council work session. And we have received some questions since that work session with regard to the need for the line, so I wanted to start out with that. So starting with the need for the electrical infrastructure improvements, AEP outlined the benefits of the new line. It will provide an additional power source, increase the electric reliability in the Dublin area, and support current and future economic development in the Dublin area. Initially, when AEP reached out to staff in early 2017, they were planning a double-circuit transmission line, but after further analysis the past few years and further evaluation of the project, they're now proposing a single circuit, so it's important to share that history of the project. It's also important to note that according to AEP staff, they do not have plans to add a second circuit at this time, and the poles that they're proposing for this project are not designed to carry a second circuit. We've heard some questions about a second line as well, and that's why I wanted to raise that this evening.
Megan, just real quick, you said at this time, they really said that there is no plan for a
There
second
is no
circuit,
plan,
period. So
yeah.
I just want to clarify that.
AEP has been given a mandate by PJM. This was briefly mentioned during the work session. And PJM is a regional transmission organization that coordinates the movement of wholesale electricity in 13 states, including Ohio and the District of Columbia. PJM uses data and forecasts to direct the operations of the region's transmission grid. Their purpose is to ensure reliability across the entire grid by making sure current and future needs are met. PJM requires that this transmission line be constructed and in operation by June 1st of 2022. So AEP staff has indicated that working back from that date and to allow time for the engineering that needs to be performed, the acquisition that needs to be conducted, and then the construction activities to take place, there's no way that they can meet that mandate if they don't file with the Ohio Power Siting Board as soon as possible. And it's our understanding that they are still planning on filing with the Ohio Power Siting Board in February. And AEP staff has provided the report from PJM, and we'll be able to share that with council following the meeting this evening. We've reviewed that report, and that's why I wanted to share some of that background information on what PJM is and an overarching view of that organization, as well as the requirement that they've handed down. So up on the screen, you see two overhead route options that AEP's been studying, and they've been garnering public feedback on both of these route options. These are the route options that have been the focus of AEP's public outreach efforts, including their website, project fact sheets, open houses, and the discussions during the City Council work session on November 18th. The first route option from the east runs along the north side of Shire Rings until Eiderman Road, and then it would turn north along Eiderman Road and then turn west and run through the undeveloped land just south of Nestle and the OU campus and over to the substation. This route would follow the existing distribution line east of Avery Road along Shire Rings Road, and the route would turn away from the existing residential area, and the existing distribution lines would remain along the south side of Shire Rings Road west of Eiderman. So that's an overview of that route option number one. The second route option would follow straight along the north side of Shire Rings Road from Emerald Parkway west to Dari Fields Park. This route would follow the existing distribution line east of Avery as well. And this overhead route option, if it were implemented, the existing distribution that runs along the south side of Shire Rings west of Avery would be relocated to the other side of the street to follow the new transmission line. And that's an overarching view of option two. So staff has been working with AEP to analyze the proposed route options as well as various options for undergrounding a portion or the entire route with the goal of ensuring all options that would minimize the impact are considered and vetted. We shared this information with City Council and at the November 18th work session, and really appreciated hearing Council's input on the options under consideration. Council's feedback has been very helpful, and we've also received a lot of input from the residents, which is also greatly appreciated and has helped guide our conversations and inform our conversations with AEP. So here's a quick summary of the input that we've received, and when I say we, this is both the input that Dublin, the city, has received, as well as AEP. We have shared the input and discussed the input, and we've consolidated the overarching themes on the screen. So generally, we're hearing these same common themes from our residents. First, we are seeing requests to bury the new transmission line. Second, we're seeing suggestions to reroute the line to follow the University Boulevard, which would pull the line up to the north and further away from the residential areas. Third, we're hearing concerns about the pole height, which has been discussed. It started out at 90 feet, and then during the discussion on November 18th, AEP indicated that it could be potentially the 80-foot pole. And the concerns there have to do with how might those heights negatively impact the look of the neighborhood and the adjacent property values. And then finally, many residents are saying that they just don't see how this will benefit them, and they don't know why it's needed. So that's why I wanted to touch on that to open the presentation. So we do take this input seriously. We've given it a lot of consideration, and we've been working with AEP the past couple weeks since the work session to explore the options that might address these concerns and minimize the concerns with these improvements. And the goal, the overarching goal of our efforts has been to minimize the impacts to the community and the residential neighborhoods in the area. So I also want to talk about the consideration of burying the lines. As you likely recall, we did request costs for several different burial options from AEP, and AEP shared those estimated cost differentials. It's a delta over the overhead construction costs. They did share that information with us prior to the last work session. It's all summarized up on the screen. This information is the same as what we had presented at that time. And the cost would be borne by the City of Dublin per AEP. And the costs range from $8 all the way up to $32 million for the complete burial of the transmission lines. And this would be just to bury the transmission lines. In all of these scenarios, the existing distribution lines that you currently see along Shire Rings Road would remain in their existing condition, as can be seen in the picture on the screen. So that's a picture of the existing distribution along Shire Rings Road, and that would be, or those distribution lines would remain with all of these undergrounding options. So for these reasons, it is staff's opinion that the transmission burial options are cost prohibitive.
Megan, can I jump in just real quick? Can you go back? So I know there's been some question about, well, gee, whose numbers do you trust and so forth. I checked with a third-party independent who actually does this kind of work for companies like AEP, Dominion Electric, Dayton Power and Light, and others, and they're also located in 5 different states where they have done this kind of work. And they got back to me and said that the average cost per linear foot to bury transmission is $1,089 per linear foot to $1,147 per linear foot. We looked at this, doing this as an option for about 1.5 miles. That comes out to about, if you bracket that, between $8 and $10 million, but that does not include riser poles and other equipment costs that are associated with undergrounding transmission lines. So I would say, based on that third-party information, who I trust a lot because they've done a lot of burial work with other work around town, but I also know they do this in other states. I think they're a reliable source, and I guess anybody can check numbers. I've even been out on the internet searching for this, and the numbers are all over the place. So that doesn't really help either, but I feel pretty confident that that's a fairly reliable number that they've given us.
So as I mentioned earlier, much of our public feedback suggested that AEP route the new line to the north and along the future University Boulevard and away from the residential areas. We've added the future University Boulevard alignment to the exhibit shown on the screen. And in our discussions with AEP, we asked the question about aligning the transmission line along the University Boulevard alignment, and they've indicated that they ruled that out, or ruled the option of following the University Boulevard alignment out because of the significant additional costs and also the challenges of constructing a transmission line along a curved alignment. And they've also indicated that same logic would apply to routing the new line along the US 33 curve adjacent to the planned OSU development or on the north side of the OSU development. However, we did meet with AEP just last week on Wednesday, and we asked them to explore the feasibility of this new option. This route follows Shire Rings Road from the east to University Boulevard, where University Boulevard will pick up, which is in front of the school's property essentially. And then it would sweep northward and away from the residential areas along Shire Rings. The transmission line would follow along the north side of a conservation easement, which we're rerouting a stream, which I'll show you in the next slide, and there'll be a conservation easement. So this route option would follow that conservation easement. Like I said, it'll be more apparent on the next slide. It would then cross over Eiderman north to the substation. So as you can see, this option would have a few bends, but it would definitely have fewer bends in this route than if it were to follow the University Boulevard alignment curves. And we discussed this concept with AEP staff last Wednesday, and they've looked into the concept. There are details that would need to be worked through. It is a very new concept. They've indicated there's details that would need to be worked through, but they believe that it is a feasible concept. So this is a zoomed-in view of the future University Boulevard roadway alignment. We've presented this graphic in our public meetings and shared it with the public as we've talked about the roadway network in this area. The green area along the north side of Shire Rings Road will be a conservation easement area for the Cosgray ditch that we will be relocating next year. So the green line with the squiggly line that runs through it, that'll be a conservation easement. There'll be the stream that runs through that. So we would propose to route the new transmission line along the northern side of that conservation easement area. And that land that the transmission line would be crossing is labeled as the City of Dublin, so that's City of Dublin property, so we do have that opportunity to do that there. This is a very rough drawing. Like I said, we just started discussing this concept last week. It is a rough drawing, but the purpose of it is to help everybody visualize the proposed alignment of this option 3. So the approximate distance from the edge of Shire Rings Road, so the northern edge of Shire Rings Road up on the screen, crossing through utility easements and then across the conservation easement, which will serve as a buffer, and the distance to the center of the proposed transmission line would be approximately 235 feet north. So we'd be realigning the route 235 feet north of Shire Rings Road, and it'd be a gradual alignment change there. So as you can see that this alignment would pull it away from the existing residential areas south of Shire Rings Road and head to the north. This would also preserve the City of Dublin site there for future development opportunities. So we've also come up with a solution to reduce the pole height. We've received a lot of questions about the poles and the height of the poles. We've also talked about color options for the poles. AEP's standard transmission pole is the 90 feet tall pole, and we've come up with a way to potentially reduce the pole height to 65 feet. So on the screen is a photo illustration of the pole that we're discussing. This graphic has been reviewed and approved by AEP staff, and they indicated it is as close a visual as we can get at this time. When we build the new University Boulevard, our plans include undergrounding the distribution as part of that infrastructure improvement project, and we would also be building Dublink as part of that roadway alignment. So the cable and the telecom providers would be required to go in Dublink, and the distribution would be undergrounded as well. So that would leave us with a single transmission line, which would enable AEP to utilize the lower pole or the shorter pole, which would be the 65-foot height. We also talked about the Natina staining of the pole, and based on feedback that we've received from residents, Since the last work session, it sounds like the desire would be to go with standards AEP steel pole. We've heard that the Natina appearance actually might draw more attention to the pole with the darker brown appearance against the sky. So that's why in this graphic, we're showing the AEP standard steel pole. And then obviously, as we've discussed, we can consider adding landscaping and low trees. Those would be options in certain areas and where they would be permitted within the easement. So with this new option, option 3 that I just outlined, we believe that we've developed a solution that's responsive to the public input that I outlined earlier. This is the public input that I had on the slide at the beginning of the presentation. This route does guide the pole line away from the residential areas and also lowers the pole height to 65 feet. So in conclusion, staff outlined our recommendation, and that recommendation is focused on pursuing option 3 that I just outlined, and the specifics of the recommendation are outlined on the screen. So first, I discussed the fact that burying transmission line is cost prohibitive. We discussed pursuing route option 3, the 65-foot transmission poles west of Avery Road, because we have the opportunity there with the University Boulevard project to underground the distribution, require the telecom and cable companies to include their lines in Dublin. It is important to mention that there will be some poles at corners or where longer spans are required, or where there's certain clearances required that might need to be taller than 65 feet, but the majority or the typical pole would be 65 feet. Staff would also propose exploring burial of the distribution, the internet, phone, all the lines between Avery and Emerald Parkway, and that would enable us to achieve the 65-foot pole height along that stretch of the route as well, because in that portion of the project, there is no alternative route available. And the estimated cost, based on the numbers that we have at this time, we need to follow up with AEP distribution staff, but the estimated cost to do that would be between $4 and $6 million. That would require debt financing, and that's something, like I said, we'd need to pursue with the AEP distribution side of the house. Based on the resident feedback, the poles should not include the Natina finish that we discussed in the last meeting. They would be the AEP standard pole. And then during the council work session, we discussed the option of adding shared use path, landscaping options, to add some amenities between Avery Road and the Emerald Parkway. And we would consider adding those amenities or constructing those amenities as part of the annual 5-year CIP update. And then also the existing distribution lines west of Avery, they would remain as they are today because we won't be impacting that area. The future burial of those lines could be considered. We've heard the residents requesting that. The future burial could be considered as part of the annual 5-year CIP update process as well, and that project would compete with all the other projects that are submitted as part of that process. So that outlines our staff recommendations. With that, that concludes my presentation. We do have AEP staff here with us to assist with answering any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Just really, approximately how far apart would the poles be?
So we had that conversation with AEP staff today, and they've indicated that they would be approximately 300 feet spacing. And I asked the question, is the spacing the same, whether it's an 80-foot tall pole or a 65-foot tall pole? And they have indicated as of today that that spacing would be 300 feet regardless of whether the pole is 65 feet tall or 80 feet tall. Now, there will be circumstances along the route where they need to span something, or, like at a roundabout or at an intersection where I mentioned the pole might need to be a little taller or the spacing might need to be longer, but generally the rule of thumb would be 300 feet.
Thanks. I wonder if you could speak a little bit, and I know I emailed this earlier, but I wonder if you could speak a little bit more specifically about, you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation regarding economic development, and how the different sort of substations interact with each other and back each other up. And I don't know, maybe this is an AEP question or Dana can explain it, but I think it'd be really important for everybody to sort of understand how these different substations and things act together and why that is an economic development tool.
Well, reliability of power is an issue for everybody, whether it's your home or whether it's business, so it's equally important to everyone. The PJM study, if you go on site and look at it, it references trying to balance load in the area. I think there's a lot of thought that it's because of development strictly related in the West Innovation District that's driving that, when in reality, it's the problem statement essentially says, and I'll quote, "Due to load increase in the area, the Dublin Sawmill 138, Dublin Sawmill substation, which is clear up on Sawmill Road by Summit View Road, 138 kV circuit will be overloaded to 116% under N11 conditions involving the loss of the Bethel-Davidson 138 kV and Davidson-Roberts 138 kV circuit starting in 2022. Now, just so you're familiar with those are essentially in the Hilliard area. So that's south of Dublin. Additionally, AEP Ohio has requested a third 138 kV source to the Dublin station, which is the one at Shire Rings Road, to maintain acceptable reliability levels for the road at risk. Dublin station serves a 75 MVA of peak demand with minimal load transfer capability, and Dublin station serves some critical loads. So that focuses on the Dublin station. So when it comes to selected solution, it is, I quote, construct a single circuit 138 kV line from Amlin Station, which is out west, to the Dublin station into a ring configuration. So what they're doing is ringing these substations together for redundancy and backup. That's straight off the JPM requirement. It's not just about the West Innovation District. The Amlin substation was located there. I could give you a long history lesson on all this, but the Amlin substation was located long before Amazon came along. It was planned for many years ago. The city actually sold 5 acres there to AEP for them to put that there so it would help the area and not be located on 161, but kind of be buried back into that area. And so that was put out there in anticipation of development that we always knew was going to happen someday. I mean, development out there has been on the books for many years and planned to happen. So I think, this is all about all these substations working together and backing each other up, the same as you try to do with distribution and dual circuitry and things like that whenever you can. I am not an electrician, but I slept at a Holiday Inn Express once. I've been around this stuff for a long time. So I know a little bit about that, but I would refer to AEP if I misrepresented anything. No, I'm getting a no. So that's there's certainly all these substations are serving growth. Got it. That's what's happening. But it's also the reliability of existing substations and existing development to the east that's equally important in all this distribution and transmission that's being set up here.
Dana, you mentioned the Sawmill station. Does that grid, that station there, serve everything north to 42?
That's more generally to the east. I don't know if Joe, if you all have that substation is generally serving everything up along Sawmill Road, both the Dublin and the Columbus side. I would think generally up towards that area.
It is. In the exact boundaries, I'm not sure. I'm on the transmission side of the shop, so we're serving that substation. Then AEP Ohio distribution is actually spreading the power out to homes. I think generally that's correct.
Yeah, I know we have circuit maps and so forth that
Right.
we've shared before, but that's generally the area it's serving.
Megan, can you put the color picture back up, the one that's got the green line and all that, right there? Why? I'm sure there's a reason, and I understand how you can't kind of make a wire go around a curve. I get that. That makes sense to me. Why would you not, it's kind of hard to, I'm pointing at my screen, which you, of course, can't see. How come you can't make that a straight line from sort of where the roundabout that's on the bottom in the middle of the page? Why wouldn't you just take a straight line across the city? I had no idea that was such a thought.
A straight line between the roundabout and the other side.
Well, I'll answer that. I think generally what you would try to do is stay as close to the right-of-way as you can, so therefore the curvature of the road was something AEP suggested that they didn't feel that they could do when you have a curvature like that. It's certainly the prerogative of council if you want to split the city property like that and consider that non-developable, you can do that, sure. I would not recommend that. I And I want to be clear, as I would not recommend that, and the reason for that is, I think this alternate route has established a significant buffer and is turning away from the residents before you get there. So I think, you got to think about what do the balance of the residents of Dublin think relative to the developability of that property as well. So it's just, what we were trying to do was reach a balancing act between the value of that property and the value of the residential property as well, and trying to find something in between that we could arrive at and try to keep as many straight lines as we possibly could.
Dana, can I ask you, originally, the transmission line going along Shire Rings on the north was, it was variable how many feet off the pavement it was, but now at 230 feet. And it's very difficult, I think, too, to determine, and this is something that probably needs a little bit more study, what the visual impact of a lower pool farther away looks like. Because on a small piece of image like this, 230 foot is something that is hard to perceive.
Right, so
the difference in footage off the pavement, I guess, is what I'm asking.
So just to clarify, and if you don't mind, I'll use this screen over here. So Shire Rings Road, I've had too much caffeine today, so I'm shaking. So Shire Rings Road, if you go off northern edge of pavement, you'll see that sort of white space in there. There's existing high-powered natural gas through that area, as well as a lot of fiber optic cable. So that is essentially functioning as a utility easement right now. This is the relocated, that's the existing stream, Cosgray Ditch, that Megan referred to. This is the relocated Cosgray Ditch. The green space represents the conservation easement. And then what we were suggesting was, as you come this direction, move more to the north and create a utility easement or transmission line easement that I believe they reference as 80 feet wide, that would generally run along the north edge of that. It could be pushed up a little bit further north or made a little bit wider. But what you need to do is add from the north edge of pavement, generally to the center line of that, as it stands right now, would be about 230 feet. Add the width of the road, and then add the easement on this side to it. I don't know, I'm guessing you're probably at closer to 300 feet when you get to this location here. This is the old existing farm property there, maintenance facility. So as you get to the next set of houses or the duplexes here, you've got, I think there's a pond in this area, so that's even further away when you start to measure that distance there, which I don't have the measurement on that. So we're just trying to get this pulled away. We actually did want to sweep this, kind of, Mayor, like you're suggesting, we wanted to sweep it through there, but again, because of the curvature thing doesn't work. I mean, that would have been our preference, optimal preference, but because the curvature stuff doesn't work, we had to carry it more on a straight line.
Is the reason the curvature doesn't work because it would require more poles to make the curve? Is that the
More poles and
primarily the
beefier
reason.
poles. Yeah, so
More
the
poles
spacing
and
would be
beefier.
pared down to accommodate that curve, and they'd be,
There'd be bigger
Bigger
poles, so we'd
poles.
see more poles
Yes.
by cutting the curve. Thank you.
So Megan, along the environmental easement along that creek, there is vegetation, there will be vegetation, the height of the trees.
currently what's planned as part of the conservation easement is low-growing vegetation, but, depending on where we head with this option, we can explore that.
Because that could make also, in addition from just sort of the distance from the road, the ability to create a more of a natural, and that is feasible?
We could
Yeah,
have,
I'd like to add to that, that it's always been staff's thought, before all this transmission stuff really was getting a foothold, and we were talking about development of these properties that the city owns, that we would always try to buffer this with vegetation or create a buffer area of green space, particularly in this corner, so that if there was, and you might recall too, that in the agreement with the Ohio State University, the city only agreed to doing one-story building here that would serve more as neighborhood-level commercial, maybe even like neighborhood retail shopping, which was something actually we had, planning department had heard from the residents quite a while back, that could be something they might be interested in. To be determined. I mean, these are just, early thoughts, but the idea was trying to create buffer along here to anything that might be built there, and that could be more plantings. The stormwater could be put back here. The stormwater can even be put underneath the lines. You see that actually out the Amlin substation where they put stormwater underneath the transmission line out there. So there could be a lot of buffer created, even addition to the conservation easement.
And I was just asking the question about that. I understand your answer, and it makes perfect sense to me. And I think Jane has a good point. If you move this away from this is addressing in large, I know there are a lot of other concerns. This is addressing the aesthetics concern. And moving it back from the road and making it a lower pole, that may accomplish those aesthetic goals. It's just hard to visualize just by seeing a picture of it and then seeing a line that accomplishes that goal. I think it is the staff and AEP have taken tremendous pains to try to solve that. And I get that. I appreciate that. And it looks like you're doing the absolute best you can.
Greg, years ago, we floated balloons when we had the water tower that was causing so much havoc over Llewellyn. And I think we also did the same thing when we were developing Kilauea and Cardinal across the street. There's a proposal to put buildings in there, and the Coventry Wood folks really didn't want any part of that. So they put balloons out to show them what the height was, and it was pretty effective in terms of at least visualizing.
Being able to
Yeah.
visualize. It's hard to visualize, yeah.
So,
Hang on, we'll get to you. I promise we'll get to you.
so on this routing, would we still be able to do a multi-use path? I think that connectivity over here is going to be important, and that would also provide an additional visual buffer between the stream protection corridor and these lines. Would we still be able to do a multi-use path with some ornamental tree plantings to further enhance the visual breakup of, if the stream corridor protection zone might limit some of the species we could plant in that? Could we bring some of the, the taller, more substantial plantings to the south that would, help to just create an additional greater amount of buffer?
Well, I think you could probably on this southern edge. If we're going to run that utility easement up along that north edge, depending on how close, we could even scoot it up more to get higher tree growth in here. Remember, we're trying to not obstruct transmission lines with tall trees, so we've got to be careful with that, but maybe we could pull it away enough that that's not an issue. So I think the answer to that is yes. As far as shared use path goes, there's one currently on the south side. We had talked about with any development in here, the idea of trying to create neighborhood connectivity by walking path up into here. Somehow that's not been determined, but just talked about. That would be in any finite planning with any development that went on here. Megan, can you go back a slide? I think it's important too that I know we're focused a lot on this area on the west end, but I think Vice Mayor Ambrose Grimm just helps to address your other issues. So here's Avery Road. Now remember, we've got this section we haven't really talked about much between Emerald Parkway and Avery Road, where you have overhead distribution present now, and then that line would go in on the north side of the road. So in that scenario, there's no option here. So that distribution needs to be relocated onto that new transmission line, which does push that up to 80 feet. And we'll go back over the recommendations here at some point, but what we're recommending there is the possibility of burying the distribution here in order to get the same pole height that we're trying to get in over here. So I guess that's not well liked. However, but, we have to be considerate to other residents as well. And so do you want an 80-foot high pole dropping down to 65, or you're going to try to, that's something our recommendations that we say we need to at least explore. Now, as far as shared use path, you've got some shared use path, sections of it up and down Shire Rings, and what we're recommending is that we do try to continue to either connect the existing shared use path or create a new one if need be. And, certainly taking advantage of, as we talked about your work session, of the transmission easement for that would be helpful, and that can be done because that's certainly the case in other places, like right around the corner here on Emerald Parkway. That same 65-foot 135 kV line, I don't know if anybody's noticed it or not, runs along Emerald Parkway right through here. So it's the same kind of a treatment and runs over top of shared use path there. So the answer to that is yes, we can do all those things. It's a matter of when and how and getting it in the appropriate budget to get that done.
Anything else, Chris? Any other questions, Jane?
It appears as if, and during part of that, go to the colored page again, Megan, please. So if I'm hearing this correctly, from where the roundabout is, we're at least a football field distance from the edge of the pavement to the center line, where the transmission poles would be, at least coming, so 230 feet, if you, not from the edge of the pavement, at least a football field from the edge of the easement on the south side. Is it correct? We're a football field away from any buildings. Is that about right? 300 foot, if you count the roadway easement, I'm just trying to get a visual of trying to understand distance here to get a sense. That's about probably a football field. And as you go west, it appears as if the line even goes farther north. Is that correct?
I'd say that's about right, yeah.
All right, and then the other question I have for you, and I just tried to pull up the West Innovation District plan. Is there anywhere in here, in the plan, and I didn't have a chance to really find it, of green space parkland that the city would have incorporated into the plan, that on this city Dublin property, that's possible that we could incorporate here and utilize that ground to then move that line a little bit farther north?
Yeah, and I think that's what I alluded to earlier is while we're just trying to demonstrate the route, could this come a little bit further north at a flat angle? It's possible you could do that and create more buffer here. That's always been something we've wanted to do. Going through the middle of this or staying up close to here is not something I recommend for all the reasons I said earlier. But trying to keep this at least buffered as much as possible is what our recommendation is.
In looking at this, one of the things that comes to mind here is when we look at the West Innovation District plan and what we're hoping for the neighborhood, one of the things that we are always looking at is connectivity and maybe creating another amenity. There's opportunity here with the conservation area and the stream bank and residential neighborhoods just due to the west of this conservation area that sort of heads north, that with almost a football field's distance, if that moves a little bit farther and that becomes more of a buffered amenity, it's possible, I'm just throwing this out, that the aesthetics then would be truly mitigated by a variety of things, by the green space, by shorter poles, by distance. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think we can take a lot of mitigative steps. I don't know that you ever get completely screen a pole type of any kind, whether it's distribution or transmission, even though we're getting a much lower transmission pole here. I would never profess that you're going to make it disappear completely, but I think you can take a lot of mitigative steps as you suggest, yes.
I agree. I would be really supportive of trying to flatten out that angle as best you can, and making that, I know that there are issues with curvature, I get that. I don't want to put those poles super close together to achieve curve, but to flatten out that angle as best we can without sacrificing all the land and putting in the buffer that Jane's mentioning and that we've talked about, that to me is something I could really get behind and I could really support. That's just my 2 cents.
Okay, I appreciate that, and we'll do what we can to do that. I couldn't sit here and promise you tonight how far that would be. That's going to take a little bit of finite engineering on their part, but I understand what you're.
Dana, assuming that you were able to move forward with some iteration of option 3, what would it take to make it happen? Is that obviously sign off by AEP, and what kind of time frame?
Well, we probably should go back to our recommendation slide, Megan, and walk back through that. I don't know if you want to, what you want to do procedurally here, but generally, this is the direction we're recommending, and this is what we're recommending as staff and asking for your direction on. And given the caveats that have been mentioned here about trying to create a little bit more buffer along Shire Rings Road if we can without giving away all of the developable property. We can try to find a little bit more compromise in there. Again, remember, we're drawing lines on a map, trying to just
Right.
show the route. It's not the finite engineering yet. So we would try to do that as best we can.
Assuming we took action, though, our input would be,
Yeah,
like your input, our input would be a recommendation.
Well, I think at the end of
Is
the
that
day, I think at the end of the day, what you want to achieve with AEP here is something that works, that what we think is best can work for everyone. I would think that AEP would want the city, and it's been my experience with these sort of things on toll rates, on area codes, when they wanted to split Dublin in two with an area code, and we stopped that. And then the previous transmission line issues that we've dealt with. If the city can go to these sort of hearings at the PUCO or the OPSB with a positive recommendation that AEP agrees to, then it's kind of done, I believe. I mean, that's a great situation for any board where everyone comes in and goes, locks arms and says, hey, we all agree on this. We would hope that this is something that the residents would agree with too, and we're kind of going as a community together on that. So, I mean, this is our best foot forward on what we think we can get done.
So as you mentioned, Dana, procedurally, so from a procedural aspect, all we would need to do as a body is vote on whether or not to direct you to pursue option 3. Because option 3 includes the 65-foot poles, not the 90-foot poles. It includes not burying. It includes, the rest of the stuff is like what we're not going to do.
Correct.
So all we really need to do is decide whether or not this city council supports staff pursuing route number 3 with you trying to do the best you can on all the issues that is route number 3.
I think that's it. And we just wanted to make sure we called out these other caveats that go along with that. But I think we've had good discussion and questions on those here, so.
Okay, so that is, does anybody else on council have anything to say at this point? Okay, so that's the question essentially before us, is whether or not to direct staff to pursue route option number 3. And I just want to reiterate the amount of work that staff and Jane and this council have put into this issue, not just over the last several weeks, but for quite a while. And we really appreciate AEP's willingness to be at the table and have that conversation. Because like I said, they could have said, because you know the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Option number 2 is a straight line. It goes down Shire Rings Road, and that's not what anybody wants. And so the willingness to have this conversation to try to adapt it and address all of our concerns is greatly appreciated. And it's been a lot of hard work to get there. So for you, Dana and AEP, we appreciate that. So now we'll open this up to public comment. We're going to follow our normal process, and we'll deviate if we have to at one point. And I'm going to start with the first person who signed in, which is Sue Day. And if anybody chooses not to say anything, just stand up and say, I pass. That's good enough for us. And we need your name and address, please.
My name is Sue Day, and I'm here with my husband, Brian, and we live at 6603 Barron's Court Loop in Ballantrae. We also did write a letter to the City Council to let you know that we are very much afraid of the perceived health issues in living near exposed power lines. There is literature out there that goes both ways. There may be scientific studies that may say that you can't link it directly, but there are still epidemiological pockets of cancers that occur when people live near power lines. And I'm hoping that somebody else is maybe going to address with more facts than I can how much property values get reduced when you live near a power line, let alone the fact that people don't want to buy near a power line. We're near retirement. We don't know how long we'll be able to afford to stay here. But when we do go to sell our home, we're certainly hoping that the faith that we put into Dublin for maintaining a good community for us when we bought our house 15 years ago, that will still be there, that the home value will be there, and that Dublin will still be a beautiful community, not a residential neighborhood right next to industrial poles. We believe that industrial things like industrial poles, electrical poles, belong in an industrial area or buried underground. And as I said at our last homeowners meeting, I understand the planning that's gone into this. It sounds like it's been 5 years in the making. I don't understand why we're now down to the wire and we have to let AEP know right away and, oh, the budget's already been set. When my bills go up, when my tax dollars go up, when my cable bill goes up, when my phone bill goes up, when my health insurance costs go up, I have to change my discernible income. And maybe, I'm hoping that Dublin can find a way and maybe reconsider burying those power lines with maybe some disposable or discernible changes to the budget. Things that, like the shared use path and buffering zones, that's all well and good, but I think it's safer to have the power lines buried. And I ask that you would please consider that. Thank you.
Christian Cooney? See, I told you we'd get to you.
I appreciate that. Can I have a PowerPoint? Can we put that in? It doesn't have a virus.
Are we able, is that something we can?
Is that okay?
I guess we'll come after you if it has a virus. So you can fix it for your fellow taxpayers.
I'll send it straight over to Best Buy. Okay. If you could put your map up with the green line and the blue line first. I apologize. And the one that you'll pull up is the if the route stays too far south presentation. Didn't know what we were going to see. But if we can pull up your map first. Does this have a pointer? Okay. If you could go back one slide. Okay, first, I want to commend council for the insightful questions that were asked at the 11/18 meeting. I thought that, frankly, I was starting to jump in my seat, and someone would always ask the question. I was very, very impressed and very thankful to, and I haven't said who I am. Again, sorry, Ray. My name is Christian Cooney. I live at 5835 Barron's Courtway in Ballantrae, and I'm the president of the Ballantrae Community Association. So first, to highlight to staff, I think that, we had a neighborhood, okay, I'm sorry.
There you go.
Okay, so we had a neighborhood meeting, and I'll go into the details on that, and part of it was where 224, I think, off the top of my head, residents got together and unanimously came back with what would be an acceptable solution. And the acceptable solution was to follow the line up University Boulevard and then west across the line where it is. And in looking at it, frankly, we're really close. And this is really good news. So I think that if AEP has to get working on something, they've got a lot of engineering they can do immediately, because the only spot where we have a problem, I would imagine, is right in that little right angle.
Can you point at that one so we can see it? There you go. Thank you.
Okay. The line coming across to the north, exactly what we would have expected, exactly what we had put in our recommended solution set. The line coming down Eiderman to University Boulevard, the same. The line coming across to University Boulevard. So we really are talking about a very narrow space where the Ballantrae community still has concerns, okay? In looking at the next slide on your presentation, it would be interesting to have someone lay out in this space what that retail would look like. I'm sorry, over here. I'm trying to balance the mic and the pointer. Okay, and now my back is to the camera, so that's just as well. So it's this space right in here. And I would imagine if you laid it out, the easement on either side of this line is pretty much useless except for maybe an alleyway or trash truck or something like that. Whereas if the line continued up closer to University Boulevard, that is probably going to be a parking lot, in which case it's still usable, functional land for retail purposes. So I think if a little more work was done over here, I think we would, as far as how that would be developed and what that would look like. It sounds like, and we very much appreciate council's direction that that's going to be one-story retail. We want more retail nearby the neighborhood, and one story is perfect. The easement here of the natural easement, that will block the sound and the visual from the neighborhood and from Shire Rings, so that's great. So I think, again, if staff was to lay out what that would look like developed, I think that what you'll find is that you will have more useful space by moving the power lines closer to University Boulevard. Okay? So those are my comments on that. Okay, now, does this really advance the slide? Okay, because there are a bunch of slides in here. Your presentation? On my presentation, yeah. If you can hop to that one. The south, too far south route. Okay, and where do I point to advance the slide? I screwed this up epically. Okay. So first off, so who is Ballantrae? We'll go through this very quickly. I want to be sensitive to time, so do I do that? I do that. Okay, that's cool. Okay, so Ballantrae is bordered by Shire Rings to the north, Cosgray to the west, Avery to the east, and Churchman and Rings Road to the south. Okay, we're the second largest HOA in Dublin. We have 979 households, and we have a roughly $500 million of property value in the neighborhood. If you look at where we're sited, frankly, this is a shame on us. We are surrounded by probably the majority of Dublin's undeveloped land. So we clearly need to do a better job getting ahead of conversations like this, conversations like Shire Rings Road, and improve our communications with city and with city staff as things are happening in the area. And part of the reason why this is at the 11th hour is because we had a few residents who saw this as an issue, and frankly, we just couldn't get traction. We are a neighborhood that frankly, we just want to be left alone. We're pretty mellow, we're pretty laid back, we're not well organized, we're not particularly well disciplined on getting out the vote. So the reaction to the presentation on 11/18, I'm trying, there we go. Frankly, I'm very surprised by what we've been able to accomplish in 2 weeks. So on 11/18, we had the meeting. Frankly, given how the presentation was laid out, half of us walked out of there with, this isn't a big deal. We got cornered in the hallway by a couple of very passionate residents who were very convincing and helped a few of us see that we might have a challenge. A couple of us spent most of Tuesday walking Shire Rings Road, laser measures and trying to figure out what really does 90 feet look like. We then started getting the word out on Tuesday in the evening. And by the following Monday, we were able to pull together a neighborhood meeting with 224 participants, 159 households from Ballantrae. That excludes the Washington Township folks who also came out to the meeting. Because again, eventually I would expect that land is going to be acquired, or whatever the correct term is, and brought into the neighborhood. And then we started on 11/26, after direction from the neighborhood, to get the word out to come to this meeting. And here we are. It's been 2 weeks, and that included 2 days for Thanksgiving, the OSU-Michigan game, and any number of hurdles that could possibly be put in the way. Okay. Of the people who turned out, this is roughly the percentage. We took the neighborhood, broke it into sections. In some areas, we made no effort to get out the vote, to get people to the meeting. So the 2% down in the southern part of the neighborhood, the 6% in the southeast. The Woodlands are always a challenge to get out there. They like being in the Woodlands. And then on the western side of the neighborhood. However, the people who are most impacted are the lakes, and they're the ones who highlighted that this is an issue. 44% of the households came to the meeting. We understood later that many, many other people didn't come to the meeting because we were out of parking. And we were out of space inside. And then I also know I saw 3 people at the meeting who I knew were there who didn't sign in. So we know that there was probably more households there than what were represented. We also had the Barons Court Way and Loop. And then in the villas at 21%, and then the central part of Trafalgar Loop. And again, I really want to congratulate the neighborhood for rallying on this issue, because we're not folks we don't have a single unified email list of the neighborhood. We don't have a way to do blast emails. This was all word of mouth to get people here. We talked about the 90-foot poles. It's a 6-story building. Awfully glad to hear that 90-foot poles are out. How many poles, if it was to go along that northern route? We'd have 30 poles. This is irrelevant at this point. This is irrelevant at this point. Okay, so of the 224 participants from Ballantrae, it was unanimously agreed that the following potential routes were the only acceptable routes to the neighborhood. Other alternatives were brought forward as far as running it farther along Shire Rings Road before turning north. They were vigorously, actually they were just shouted down. And the routes that were considered were going north, and again, go ahead, yeah. So again, it's following the University Boulevard, which to the greatest extent that staff has been able to put together has been met, and we congratulate staff for doing that. 65-foot pole option. Okay, so a 65-foot pole is a 5-story building, which is still pretty high. So what we did is, again, trying to get your mind wrapped around what does 65 feet mean and what does 90 feet mean. We ended up, we have a guy in the neighborhood who has a very, very expensive drone, and we asked him to take it up and to actually shoot pictures. So we asked him to take it to 90 feet, we asked him to take it to 60 feet. Apparently it's in 10-foot increments. We took the photos from 4 different locations along Shire Rings Road. So we had first right at Cosgray, we had at the church just to the east of Eiderman, we had at the utility center for the city, and at the bus depot. The numbers are just for reference, but the numbers on the screen are the golf course holes. Because as you see the photos, I'll reference these to put in perspective of just how incredibly far these poles will be visible. The thought is, if the drone can see the house can see the poles. Okay, this is to get a sense of from Cosgray, and again, since this is out of the route, we'll just go another one, this gives a sense of perspective of the difference between 90 feet and 60 feet. So you can tell that you get much more visibility at 90 feet, but you still have an extensive visibility of a 60-foot pole. Okay, we did the same thing for Shire Rings and Eiderman. Again, this is taken at the church parking lot, and this is relevant because this is just to the west of where these lines will turn north. And as you can see, this is with the 90-foot. Let's go to the 60-foot poles here. And again, I'm sorry that the frame came down so far, but you can still see the 4th and 5th holes on the fairway. And I would imagine if it was angled up just a little bit, you could see further. Now, these were taken about 40 feet from the road. So again, you back that up another 100, 200 feet, it's going to have it's going to be better for the residents if that's where the poles are located. And then let's go on to the last shot. This is the comparison between 60 and 90. Let's go to the 60. Next slide. So again, this is from the service center. You can still clearly see the 4th fairway. You can see the 5th fairway. And I imagine if it was clear, you could probably see the clubhouse for the golf course. And then we'll do a comparison on it. Again, 90 to 60, and then we'll go to the bus depot. This is 90, one more to the 60. You'll see at the 60 foot at the bus depot, this is again about 40 feet north of Shire Rings. It's becoming pretty opaque. Now, the one thing that I will say is it doesn't necessarily address the issues of the residents who are on the west side of Barron's Court Way, right at Shire Rings. But that has a berm, and I imagine that with the right trees and right planting, you could protect their view from their front door. So the question is, does 65-foot poles fix Shire Rings, the Shire Rings road route? And at this point, given the distance back from the road, we didn't look at that. And I think it would be worth taking a look and taking the drone up, or better yet, if we get Washington Township to get to take one of their ladder trucks up. Now that we're at about four stories high, I think their trucks reach that far. We could get a really stable platform to take a look and actually see how visible would these be. And I think that's the last one. It's close enough. We're good. So if we can go, let's go back to your guys' the green and blue slide. So again, that turn north in this section, and this is the only section we're looking at, is that the area that's bracketed by the new Cosgray ditch. If that was up against University Boulevard, I believe we would be done. Am I correct? So what we would ask staff to do is to, and maybe there's, I'm sure this, the council and staff knows all types of developers. I bet you they could map out that space just fine, about how you optimize that space so the lines cause the least, diminish the value, the city's value as much as possible. And if it comes to the point that we just can't get over a reduction in value of that real estate space, then I would suspect that burying the lines from the circle to that point is a much less expensive option than anything else that's been out there. We have, regarded the shared use pass from Avery to Emerald Parkway was discussed at our meeting, and uniformly, no one had any interest in it. Buys Ballantrae at least, no value. We're very content with the beautiful parkway that was established along Warner Temple. It has tunnels that already go under Avery. It's a beautiful route, and we're very content with that. If anything, if bike routes were going to be done, we have other suggestions we could use. But for $850,000, I think there's other things that could be done, such as burying power lines in that section of the road. So again, we're delighted by the plan, by the improvements to the plan that have been presented tonight. They again substantially meet everything that we asked for. The 65-foot poles are a material improvement versus the 90-foot poles. And we have spoken with the church that's just east of Avery, the Fellowship Church of Dublin, I think, and Pastor Jim. He has offered up his sanctuary again for us to meet, and we would be for the 16th, Monday, the 16th of December. And we can go through, we will take some more drone shots. We would love to walk the path with city staff to make sure we're at exactly the right spot and send the drone up. And if the drone actually isn't as accurate as what it's been represented, we'd be happy to make changes to that. Ideally, if we could get the Washington Township fire truck to take us up to 60 feet, 65 feet, and see what we see. I think that would be a great way, better than probably flying balloons for water towers. And we would invite staff and council to that meeting on 12/16 to finish anything else, unless we're good to go with relocating that right angle on the route.
What time is the meeting?
We typically meet at 6:30, but I think in
6:30.
deference to council, we could meet at 7.
6:30 is good.
6:30 is better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Megan, really quickly, the poles, is that 65 feet above the ground? So, because the 90-foot poles, I was told, would be 80 feet above ground.
It's 65 feet above the ground.
Okay, so it's really a 75-foot pole, but 65 of it's above the ground?
Yes.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. We appreciate you coming in. Now, So as we go, our typical rules here, and the reason that red light is blinking is each person gets 5 minutes to talk. I think we've given Christian a kind of, everybody's donated some of their time to him to make sure he was able to cover everything that he wanted to cover. However, with that having been said, I will go through the rest of the people who signed in. I would just ask you to try to be considerate and not repeat things that have already been said. You know, we've been listening and we understand what your concerns are. Kathy Butler? Good evening, ma'am. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor. Put this one down right. Can you hear me?
We can.
Good. Okay. Good evening to everyone here at council. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for making the consideration of what we are been asking about. Thank you, staff, and thank you everyone that is a resident around Ballantrae and in that community who has come tonight. I do appreciate it. It takes a lot of time. And I will. My name is Kathy Butler, and I live at 5965 Roundstone Place. I'm a realtor. I absolutely know the effect of the values and the decreased value when we come up against power lines. The more conspicuous the pole, the lower our values will go. And in the 20-plus years that I have been a realtor, never once has anybody said to me, find me a home close to those power lines. That's where I want to live. Never once. And all I ever am told is, don't find me a home near a power line. I don't need stats. I don't need anything for everyone here to know that, because not a one of the people sitting anywhere in this room would prefer the same identical home to be close to a power line. And when I go through the stats and I look at the studies, some of the studies that are older will say it's not that much difference. As you look at the newer studies, they will tell you there's a huge difference. When you look at these studies, it depends on why they were actually conducted. You have studies that were put out because of utility companies who have actually asked due to lawsuits to have those studies made. You have older studies before anyone ever knew that there was a health concern, and the health concern mainly is the children leukemia. That is the big health concern. There are more, but that's the dominant one. And when people come in and buy in Dublin, there's a reason. They buy because they know the Dublin standard. They bought those houses in that area, in the Ballantrae area and the surrounding residents, because they knew that Dublin would take care of them. And that's why they bought there. There are some areas of Dublin that do have homes with power lines, but the ones that I think of are the ones that had the power lines already in existence. Then the homes came. In this case, our homes were bought and we expected to be protected. Now come the power lines. And I know I've been told that AEP may not care about our health concerns. They may not care about our values of our homes going down, but I know you all do. I am sure you do. So this is what the two biggest studies will say. One is by the National Association of Realtors. The other one is by the Appraisal Group 1. So you're talking about realtors, you're talking about appraisers that work only with valuations. National Association of Realtors, lots, not homes, lots, located by high voltage transmission lines tend to sell for a whopping 45% less. According to the Journal of Real Estate Research, that's lots. Lots not adjacent, but within 1,000 feet. Not 230, 1,000 feet. Discounts by 18%. I have these studies I can give to you. The total property value of a home on a lot around that area is 9%. A $400,000 home just devalued to $364,000. A $500,000 to $455,000. Appraisal group said that they found that the most recent studies ranged with a loss of 10 to over 30% of overall property value. 400 at the worst case scenario has just now devalued to 280,000. Anybody who understands valuation of homes knows that those power lines are going to hurt our values. And it's going to hurt the people the closest, but when somebody's looking to buy a home, they're going to see all of Ballantrae. It's going to devalue everybody over there. And I guess what I'm saying is we bought here because we trusted everybody in Dublin to take care of us. And that's the reason why so many people said they didn't even, when they heard about it, they didn't even second guess or even think about coming to a meeting. They said, Dublin will take care of us. That's what we expect. I lived in northwest Columbus, close to Sawmill Road. I loved my house. I loved my neighbors. I sold, and we moved to Dublin. I spent so much time fighting city council in Columbus on zoning in that corridor that we decided to leave. I could not take the amount of time it was taken from my family, and we moved here. And yet, here I stand. We need your protection. You said a lot of things tonight that helped a lot, but a 65-foot pole will never, 230 feet, will never be able to be landscaped with vegetation or anything like that. I can also tell you, I will be very brief and stop at this point. I'm sorry, I have so many things to say now after listening to you all, but I don't know if the rest of the group agrees with me. So we do have to have a talk. We do have to come back and talk through with council, because to me, which is not something that anybody else has said, but if we're talking about 4 million burying from Avery on the industrial side, why not use that 4 million, increase it a little bit, and bury it right coming closer to Shire Ring, and then way up north, go on and put those 90-foot towers, because they're farther away from us, but utilize that money to help us and bury where you can to help our residents. Thank you very much.
Kurt Smith. And I would just point out the little timers will let you know when your time is up. Welcome, Mr. Smith. Thank you for coming in.
Kurt Smith, 6692 Roundstone Loop here in Dublin. I am on the board of directors of The Lakes, which is a 80-unit condominium development right on the edge of Shire Rings Road. We stand to be among the most impacted of the residents of Ballantrae. And the thing, I've sat back and listened to the other speakers, and I've ticked off all of the eloquent points that I had prepared for you, so I won't bore you with those things. I just want to mention just a couple of things real quickly. Number one is what you see in here with the green hats. We came prepared with 200 green hats tonight. We passed them all out. Outside these doors here, what you don't see are the other 150 hats that we passed out. What you don't see are the folks that came in and couldn't find a parking space close enough to come in and be present and represent. So we just want to emphasize to you that it's not just this group in here. It's the lobby, it's the overflow area, it's out into the parking lot, it's the overflow parking down towards the recreation center. There are concerned residents who really implore you to do the right thing here in terms of the decisions that you're making. The meeting that we had last week was brought together by volunteers from our residents. We had people going door to door, passing out flyers all weekend long. I was the driver of the drone car this weekend. We went and took pictures before and after the OSU game. We would not interrupt that sacred time to take drone pictures during the Michigan game. But we did that, and we wanted to make sure that you had an accurate representation. That drone has a height meter on it that actually we can fly it to a particular height and take those pictures, so those are our accurate pictures. So we wanted to make sure that we made that point to you. I think the biggest point that I heard tonight that I just wanted to react to was when we were talking about that area and straightening that line along University Boulevard. The comment was made that if we do that, council is going to have to reconcile the fact that that land will become, I believe the term was non-developable. What I want to emphasize to you is that if we leave that at an angle the way it is now, we're more or less saying that the land on the other side of that road is what I would say undesirable, not non-developable, because that's going to have an impact on our real estate values. So I guess the question to you is, will you side with undevelopable or undesirable? And we as residents would hope that you would consider the impact to our real estate values. My light isn't red yet, but I want you to see that I'm going to stop before it turns red. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Smith,
for
for
the
coming in.
wonderful job that you've done in listening to us. And one last point that I wanted to make. And my dad was a Baptist minister. I just can't stop with just that. But we want to still be able to say when we give our friends directions to our neighborhood, come to the Bunny Park. We don't want to give directions by saying, when you get off 33, follow the power poles. Thank you.
Gretchen Tinnerman? Is she maybe out in the lobby? I don't know if there's does anyone know Gretchen? Can we see if she's here? Tinnerman, Tinnerman. All righty. Good evening, ma'am. I would just point out you were out there. Maybe you didn't see it. The lights will let you know when your time is up.
I did see it, thank you.
The
I'm gonna be
floor is
quick.
yours.
I'm going to be quick. So, hello, I'm Gretchen Tinnerman. My husband's Dave Tinnerman, and we reside at 6760 Trafalgar Loop in Ballantrae. We also own a growing technology firm in the deck. So we have been committed to the city of Dublin. We moved here 6 years ago, and have continued to support it, not as just residents, but also as a business. I'm going to challenge the council and staff with one thing, and something I have a hard time understanding is the initial statements made on the presentation tonight that said, burying the line is cost prohibitive. What action and due diligence did city staff and council do in 2017 to understand the cost? Because as I hear you speak tonight, you're just now understanding this range of $8 to $32 million in cost, and yet not have done the due diligence prior. And again, to the point others had made, I think the engagement, although some of us would, I think, agree, we weren't aware of these meetings or notifications by AEP to be involved. However, we trust the city. If someone had said, which they have, the city is going to construct these 90-foot poles, our first response as citizens is absolutely not. City of Dublin would not allow that to happen. That's why we live here. So I challenge the city now and the staff, instead of folding to AEP and folding to what you believe is a number to understand the cost? Are we going to RFP? Are we understanding the different routes of bearing? Because as I hear everyone talk about the options, although good options, and I'm not devaluing the need for the additional electricity and power and economic development, however, have we explored the options to Barry? Because as I hear everyone speak tonight, it's not an option. So I challenge the city to look at this. I drove down, all the way here from Ballantree. I didn't see any power lines. And my guess is that wasn't cost prohibitive. Why? It's cost prohibitive for us at Ballantree now. Why has it not been cost prohibitive for the city in prior years? So, thank you.
Thank you, Gretchen, for coming in. You want to say something, Tom?
Yeah, hey Gretchen, just to let you know, the city of Dublin passed an ordinance maybe 40 years ago that when new development comes in, the developer puts the lines underground. And really, that's been the law of the land. So any new subdivisions coming in, they put them under.
Well, I would just remind you that this is an AEP transmission issue, so we just need to make that, we just need to keep that clear. It's not city.
Mayor, if I could, I don't
Sure.
know if it's appropriate. A couple things I would just simply address. There are a lot of legacy overhead lines left in the city that are left, and I call them legacy because they were typically here before the city developed out. So back to Councilmember Reiner's point, as things have developed, they've been forced to go underground. That's true. You have a legacy distribution line along Shire Rings Road that's been there for a long time. People have moved next to them, knowing that they were there. Those distribution lines have not been buried. However, all of Ballantree, as it was developed, has been buried. So you don't have that in your neighborhood. So, and when the city has done, because I know this question has come forward about policy and burial. So the city has taken proactive measures to bury legacy power lines when it can, typically done when new road construction is happening. As an example, distribution along University Boulevard will be buried. Internet, phone will also be buried. So as new things are being built. So that's why you'll see them, and they're kind of touch and go throughout the city. There are a number of other neighborhoods who would love to have legacy distribution lines buried too. There's a list of them that would like to see that as well. Transmissions lines, I got it. I don't disagree with you. That's a new thing coming in, and there just has to be a decision made as to how much can be spent to bury that. That's therein lies the big policy
Which is the
challenge.
concern, right, of Ballantree. Did the city and city staff, who I would hold responsible, right?
Gret, you got to come back up to the microphone because we need to record all this.
Yeah, I'll answer that first question.
I understand.
Yeah.
However, again, did the city and city staff take appropriate actions in 2017 to understand the cost, to plan for this $8 to $32 million, right, in 2020, 21, 22? And from what we've heard tonight, at least, based on the initial presentation and feedback from someone contacting someone else in the industry.
I did that.
That hadn't been established.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So I again, am challenged with, I trust the city as a resident, I trust the city with the growing business. I'm challenged now with a trust of a city. I pay an abundance of taxes too, as a business owner and as a resident, that I can't default to. Aesthetically, they're going to do the right thing for us as citizens.
Okay. In 2017, there was a double, excuse me if I can talk, in 2017, this was proposed to be double circuitry, which would have been twice as bad. This did get down to single circuitry as a result of much discussion and actually the need of the transmission system. So we have been studying this off and on since 2017.
I know,
Discussion's been
Dana,
on.
but you're not answering the question.
Discussion's been on, discussion's been off. I'll answer the question. It's
Did the
30.
city actually look at costs?
We did, yes.
In 2017?
Yes.
And the different options? Then where are
Yes.
those costs?
It was a very different project at that time. At that time, it was double circuit, which is a very different project than a single circuit. And we did have those costs. We went through a very similar process that we're going through
In
this
no
year.
time in any presentation have any of those costs as options, and even in the single circuitry, been available for us as citizens to understand what those potential costs would be in regards to bearing. Instead, we're now into options, option 3 and other feasible options that don't involve bearing.
And we haven't shared the
Yeah,
costs
that's-
from 2017 simply because they really aren't relevant at this point since we do have a different project, since at that time it was a double circuit. But we did have the costs of different options at that time. We had discussions with council, there was a public meeting. We went through a very similar process in 2017. Then in 2018, AEP spent pretty much that entire year reevaluating the project, and then they came back earlier this year to present the single circuit route.
Okay, thank you, Gretchen, for
option.
coming in. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Todd Freeman? Hey, Gretchen, could you see if Todd's out in the hallway so we can? He drove you. Okay, all right then. Mr. Freeman, welcome. We have a little light system right there to try to keep this fair for everybody. We've got to stay even-handed.
This will be pretty short.
Surely.
Todd Freeman, my wife is Stephanie. We live at 6776 Trafalgar Loop. I've heard a lot of things being said tonight, agree with a lot of the comments from the staff, a lot of the comments from the resident. I guess what I don't understand is as you're assessing the delta on the costs, have you also looked at what those home decreases will do to your tax assessments and your tax dollars coming in and applied that against that delta? If the Ballantrae residents lose $50,000, $60,000 on their houses, that's a lot of tax dollars that you're losing as city council, as the city of Dublin. You guys can spend all the money you want on developing a walking bridge in Bridge Park. You can develop whatever area, bury lines, as long as it's convenient for the city's pocketbook. But when it comes to the residents who have been here and who are established here, it's very clear based on the renderings that you don't care about the residents. All you care about is what you can do with developing the property. It's the Ohio State. It's how much you're going to get from Ohio State. It's how much you're going to get from this vacant land where you're putting retail, but you don't care about the decrease in home values to the residents of Ballantrae. And that's not fair to us. We've been here for years. We've paid tax dollars every year. We pay some of the highest tax dollars in the city. And for that to not be a consideration, I mean, the simple fact that you're looking at burying through the commercial district, but when you get to the area that affects the residents, you're putting up the poles. What sense does that make? I mean, that's a question that came to mind out there, and many people outside were upset about.
Yeah, I really need to clarify that because this has come up a few times, and I think it's, if I said it wrong, I apologize, but this was not what I thought what I said was, and what I intended to say. What we were proposing to do east of Avery Road was bury the distribution piece, which is much, much less expensive than transmission. We would propose to do that in order to lower that line, because that line has no other alternative route. So we were trying to respond to the owners of property as well to the east of Avery Road, just like we're trying to respond to all of you to try to make all things as equal as possible. So it's the distribution piece. If we buried that, what I was saying, if we buried that, it would lower that transmission line like it does to the west to 65 feet. That's all I was saying. I was not suggesting burying transmission east of Avery Road.
So through the lot where it says City of Dublin and University Boulevard, do you know how much it would cost to bury that section?
probably about $3 million. And the
have
thing
you
about it
done
is,
an
it's not as, the thing that I would ask, well, if I had the footage, I would tell you, because it's about $1,090 per linear foot on the lower end and $1,147 per linear foot on the higher end to bury. The challenge, I think AEP would need to answer that is it feasible to bury for such a short distance? That's the only reason I wouldn't say we could do that. I don't know.
Have you done an assessment on how much property tax values will be
I'd like
increased in
to,
Ballantrae?
I'd just like to point out, just to give a little tax lesson here, that the city gets less than 1 mil of your real estate taxes. The schools get 50 or 60 mils, the township gets 8 or 10 mils, MRDD, everybody gets significantly more real estate tax money than we do. It's neither here nor there, but I want you to know that we get less than 1 mil. So it's a very minuscule amount of money that property tax raises for this city to invest, so.
But there's, I think, 900 residents in Ballantrae. You get tax dollars from restaurants, businesses that we do business with.
You know what, and I get your point, and we actually do care, or we wouldn't be going through this whole conversation. I mean,
And I didn't mean to imply you didn't
Well,
care.
to say you guys don't care.
Right.
We do care. We do care. That's why we're here, and that's why we're even having this conversation. And I want to make something abundantly clear, and it's what Dana just mentioned. No, transmission lines, at least what's proposed here, no transmission lines are being buried anywhere along this route. That's the recommendation. The only thing that he recommended we consider, and it says here to investigate burying, is your distribution lines that are already there on the south side of Shire Rings, on the industrial side. If you put those underground, that allows the poles for the transmission lines, which are going in down there, to come down to 65 feet, so it would be uniform throughout the entire run. That's the idea. It is not, we're going to bury for the corporate areas and not for the residents. We
Right.
don't care about residents. None of that is true. We wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation if we didn't care.
Are there any transmission lines in the city of Dublin buried?
Yeah, there's one line, one line that's buried. That was able to be buried back in 2002. And the story of that one is that we were able to get a lot of, first of all, AEP had budgeted a lot of money for land acquisition for this route. And the route is in the south, is down towards, down along Wilcox Road and out along 270 out in that area. It was going to come up Wilcox Road where there were distribution in the front yards. And then they were going to convert that to transmission in the front yards of homes, not 230 feet away, in the front yards. So the city did work with AEP, and really the saving grace in that, and I'll give you all the minutes to this, it has all the recommendations, everything that was funded, was that the savings grace to that was that AEP had significantly, in my opinion, and I think I probably said this in the record back then, over budgeted for land acquisition. We were able to get all the land acquisition donated for free, so then all that money went into burial of the transmission. The city had closed a gap of about $2.5 million was it to make that happen. But the route completely changed, and there were just a lot of other things that were able to happen like that made that feasible. It's not feasible here. I don't know if they got smarter about it. No offense to AEP, and budgeted less for acquisition, and we didn't have the money to play with. So the nexus for the city of Dublin to bury this entire route is somewhere to the tune of $26 to $30 million to bury that, compared to the $2.5 million that the city spent to bury the other lines. That's the only place. Now, there are transmission lines. If you go around the corner, it's great you flew a drone. You could walk around the corner to Emerald Parkway and see the 65-foot poles that go all the way up through Hemingway in backyards, all the way up. And those people bought knowing those were there. They were there before, so they weren't put in later. So, and there are other transmission lines that are on lattice towers with the houses nearby, but those are choices those folks made. So I'm just answering the question about other.
And I appreciate the council coming here and, considering other.
Not defending anything, just telling you what it was.
And considering other proposals, and I know I'm over time, I would just say, I think there's a way that somehow, some way, we can figure out between AEP, City of Dublin, the residents, to come up with a solution that appeases everyone, so that we can continue to call Dublin home and be proud of the home we live in.
I agree, and that's our goal. That's what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman, for coming in. Dan Mowbray? Am I saying that correctly? Yeah, Mowbray. Welcome, Mr. Mowbray.
My name is Dan Mowbray. I live at 6648 Carolyn Place in the Villas of Dublin. I'm just a resident. When I started to investigate this whole thing, I found out that basically the issue came up about Amazon coming in 2015. So it was no surprise to the city council, and things progressed. You did a deal with Amazon, presumably. You granted them $6.8 million of free land, 70 acres of free land, along with a $500,000 incentive. You gave that to them free. But what you did not apparently do, and maybe I stand here to be corrected, you did not put any provision in that agreement to protect the residents of this area with regard to where the power lines were going to go to this new complex out there. And this is just one of 5 that Amazon is proposing to build. So in this agreement, you didn't look out for us, as far as I can see. Now, as far as this road down here, every time I go down it, I think that those lines should be buried anyway, those distribution lines. They need to go underground. It should be the policy of this city to bury every line that they possibly can. I don't understand, and when you see a beautiful residential area like Ballantrae is, why you want to sully this area with these lines. I get the economic development thing, but I also get the idea that Amazon has a hell of a lot of money. We all know that. AEP is not hurting for money. We all know that. And I bet you a lot of people in this audience don't know that AEP and Amazon went down to the PUCO, and they got a 10-year reduction on their rates for Amazon, 10 years. So Amazon gets free, less power, or is going to pay less for 10 years for their power. Meanwhile, AEP gets to build these lines. And then after 10 years, AEP gets to make a hell of a lot of money passing this power through. And what do the residents of Ballantrae get? We get these abominations. I characterize them as War of the Worlds things marching down Shires Rings Road. They're just, coming down. And here's the last thing I'll say. The communication from the city council to the residents has been awful. I have talked to the presidents, the current president of the Ballantrae, Greater Ballantrae Association, and to the past 3 presidents of the villas. They didn't know about this. Why didn't city council reach out to this group? It started in 2015. Nobody knew about it until just this last September, when AEP had to do something that was mandatory to the residents just in the area. This came late to us. And I can tell you something. If we had known 2 years ago, and you guys had done your job in making this agreement with Amazon and putting in some provisions where you'd have some authority to control this, we wouldn't be here today. You can't have these things out there. I don't know what the answer is. All I know is those lines should be as far away, if they're not going to be buried, and that's preferable and should be, they should be as far away from the residential area as possible. And if those people I don't think we should split, the consideration here. We live here now. The buildings and the businesses that come in that other area up there around University Boulevard will have to take that into considerations. So, I'm afraid that you have, I'm afraid I'm very critical. And I think this is an opportunity for you to show that you have the guts to, do the right thing. And frankly, if the Amazon project didn't go through, it wouldn't bother me at all. I would like Amazon to be there. They would generate tax dollars. I want AEP to make money, but I don't want it to make money, or either one of them to make money at the expense of the people who already live here, the people that you represent. So, there you are. Thank you.
Okay, that is the last person that we had signed in. If anybody feels compelled to raise their hand and come up, I'm not going to cut off any debate or anybody comment. You've all heard everything that has been said. We've heard it. I think we get it. Seeing no, yes, sir. No, you got to come up here to the microphone. We have to tape record everything so we can keep track of it.
I'll make this really
We need your name and address, please.
My name is John Howell. I live at 6655 Ballantrae in the village. And basically, I thought of some very good points. And I would like to compliment the gentleman who made the comment about he wouldn't put it through the middle of that little area right there because he would lose the value. But you heard from a realtor, I think she knows what she's talking about, that those big power lines they're going to have to drive under to go to whatever businesses you think are going to go in there. Who's going to want to do that? Bury that little section. I believe in compromise. I don't like them going down all the way at Avery either, but that's all basically city buildings. That's the school buses going in there. There's a couple businesses down there, a couple empty businesses on the other side of the road. Bury that section there, that little section that crosses there. And don't say it's too inconvenient. Who cares if it's inconvenient? Bury that. It's not a bad compromise. Thank you.
Thank you for coming up. Okay, seeing no other hands, and I don't hear anybody pounding on the door, either that door or the front door, so I'm going to go ahead and go forward. Does council have any additional discussion, comment? Jane? Kathy?
I had a question, a couple of questions, about burying between those lines, making that triangle. The conversation earlier was if it's feasible. And so the question for either our staff or AEP, is that a feasible thing to do?
I'll defer to AEP.
That's me. I would say, can it be done? Yes. Is it our preference to underground a line on that short a distance when the rest is overhead? No. But I think, could we
And
engineer
why
it?
is that? Why is that? Why does the length of that line?
Sure. I think just thinking of the visual impacts concerns, I know we shared it in our meeting last month. Understanding what the rise and pulls will look like to underground, I think if you understand what those look like, you may have a different opinion. If not, then I think it would be a consideration for cost. But I'll tell you that appreciate all the feedback that we've got. It's easy for us to again draw a line on the map, but understanding from folks that live here and from city that are considering the economic development impact as well as impacts to the community, it's helpful for us to help pick a route. So do appreciate all the feedback.
Jane? Kathy, was that it? You done?
And to be clear, the other question, Dana, that certainly been raised here is what would be that cost? And I guess it would depend on where it goes down and where it comes out of ground, right? I mean, this picture was not designed with that in mind. And you could see where it could be buried and where it could come out of ground, could be at any sort of point along that. But that 1,089 to 1,100 cost per foot would be in a range somewhere of, you said 3 million, is that, that's a guess?
I did, and I shouldn't have said a
guess.
word because I don't know the linear feet of that. What I would suggest is that we go back, and what we were really trying to achieve here was what we thought was a good compromise. And like I said, this could swing a little bit further north this way, but if you absolutely want to come down this direction, we'll relook it. I just need council. I just need council to understand what you're giving up And I understand the issues with the residents of Ballantrae. This is land owned by the entire city of Dublin residents. You have a decision to make relative to that balance to everyone, and that's the only reason I brought it up the way I did. If council wants us to make that straighter and let the chips fall as they may, that's all fine. I don't have an issue with that whatsoever. We were just trying to find a solution that balanced this out, trying to come north as much as possible. We really thought we were achieving it, getting away from these residents right here, and especially these over here, because we were really pulling that away. I understand the drone shots and all of that. I understand the visibility to it. If we're going to stay above ground, then, okay, I hear everybody loud and clear. We'll try to keep pushing this further north.
I think
I think that's where we had gotten to actually before
I
comments.
think we need to get some pictures of, some renderings of the risers that you mentioned. Was it a riser? Because it's a big deal coming out of the ground at each point. And so we need to have that information for this group here as well, so they can see what's going to actually be there at the point where it.
And that's a great point, because at the work session, as I recall, the residents were not real happy about the fact that if we were to bury it, starting back here, if it had gone straight. That was our initial thing, was to try to just bury it coming this direction, and then nobody has to deal with it out here. But that number was tripled, got really expensive. And then the other thing that was raised is that everyone have to look at a riser tower there, which is super ugly. And I think I saw that in one of the Ballantrae presentations. They showed a picture of a riser pole. And yeah, if you're doing it for a short distance, then,
Dana, this may be something auxiliary, but the relocation of the ditch that we're currently undertaking on this, I'm wondering if we were to take this line further to the north and take it along University Boulevard, is there any opportunity we might have with the parcels of land to the west of where it turns north and relocating the entirety of the ditch all the way across Eiderman? And that might help solve our developability of the balance of that parcel, because it would open up a lot of land that is currently occupied by the ditch relocation. Am I clear in what I'm asking you to?
I'm sorry, which
Can I have
part
your
of the
little
ditch?
highlighter?
Going what, back
Have your
this
little
way?
highlighter.
Don't put your eye out with that or
So
anything else.
if we're trying to talk about the developability of this parcel, if this were to come further up along University Boulevard, this section of the ditch that's currently being relocated, could we possibly work with these two landowners to bring the ditch this direction? And then that would open up some more land there that might make it developable.
That was just, and Megan, you might be able to speak to this more. We looked at that pretty extensively as we were trying to look at this ditch relocation. That would be the plan ultimately, that the ditch, as these properties, let's say they redevelop, or this piece were to redevelop somehow, that would be frankly on the burden of the developer to relocate that and go through that process. I think that's where we had left it at that point.
Well, I'm just saying, in our analysis of if we would take this to University Boulevard, I think it would be most beneficial if we looked at that ditch relocation, because that might make the balance of that developable,
Well,
yet.
we want to keep the ditch to the south, correct?
Yep.
Right, it's just what do we do with that? Yeah, that's been on our radar screen for a long time, and I remember talking about the relocation of this ditch back when we were building service centers and bus garages and things out here, and what to do about that. That's long before the city ever owned that property.
So, hey, Dana, thanks for, I appreciate what you're trying to do for the common good of the city financially, but I think what we want to do is come back with something, the Ballantrae solution of the poles going up University, what that would look like, what that's going to be like, cost of, and I don't think the audience is aware of maybe how unattractive that is to plant those things underground. If they came to the last meeting, we covered that, and I think you had slides of it. But I think we want to find out what that cost is to run that up University and find out what the deal is. And
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I'd like to see a plan redrawn with the Ballantrae or the university solution on it, and then also the cost worked out on what it costs to run that thing along University and burying it, and see what that is. So two items I think are important. I don't think the audience is aware of how unattractive it is, where those things go into the ground, but maybe there's another way to,
It's on each end.
another way to mitigate that too, again with landscaping and stuff to make it more appealing.
Yeah, that's what's on each end of the burial, right there. So, when we looked at the idea of burying it along Shire Rings Road, we were trying to pull that riser pole on the east more to the front of the service center where it wouldn't be quite so visible, and then taking it down Shire Rings and then back in the park, further west into the park, then that's where the other riser pole would be to bring it out. Then that way, at least that section could be buried. That was what we were, and again, that was never a recommendation. That was just an analysis of what it would cost and trying to understand what all was involved.
Question,
with it.
Kathy. How
Would
tall are
those be 65 feet? Those risers?
I'm going to say no. I think they're going to be closer to the 8, probably, they're much beefier, meaning round, and the foundations that go into that are very significant. And I'm going to say that height probably gets up closer to about the 70 to 80 foot level. I think Joe was going like this when we were.
70 or 80 or what?
They would be taller. The exact height is, they'd be taller than 65, probably closer to 80, 90 feet.
So I have a couple questions. We have some options here, and we obviously need some time to get some more facts. And trying to balance all of it, we talked about the cost. So I think there are some options on cost to burial going down Shire Ring straight if we didn't change it, and then bring it up. So there's that. Could you bring up the map again? With the, so we need a true cost on what it would cost on the one option where it would go from, go back one. For the stretch from the Avery Road or the roundabout to just, I guess, all the way to Cosgrave. We need that cost. That's obviously going to be much more expensive. Most importantly, I think, if we can find the cost of what it would be to run it up buried, University Boulevard, and the question I would ask is, wouldn't there be a cost savings as we're building the boulevard, building the roadway, because we're excavating? There would be no savings there? Or also, second question would be, because of the fact that the AEP does not have to buy land across the city, wouldn't that be a savings to them and in a way?
Sure. That land is at $150,000 an acre, right, Donna? It's about $150,000 an acre by the linear feet and the width. So I don't know how many acres it would wind up being, but we could calculate that. It's not going to be nearly enough to contribute much towards burial, I can tell you that.
Well, they wouldn't have to buy land. I mean, how much of this has been purchased by AEP? Have your easements rights have already been purchased? No. So, no, I would, a couple of things too, and I agree with Mike. I think we also need to see what 230 foot looks like off of Shire Rings, but I believe that there's an opportunity here for a short distance of burial along University Boulevard. And then the last question I would ask you is, you said, realize what you have to lose. What is there to lose by burying it along University besides the cost of it? Economically, what would that hurt? How would that hurt this property, this parcel?
Burying it wouldn't
hurt
the
it,
property. No.
right? So
Just like it wouldn't have hurt if we buried it down Shire Rings.
Right.
It's sight unseen.
But there might be a loss of value if we left it above ground a loss of value to that parcel if we left it above ground along Shire Rings 200, 300 foot off. I mean, because it's above ground, there is some loss in value of the parcel.
It seems to me and I can tell for you folks out in the audience, I've been dealing with Dublin City staff and with Dana for this, so I'm going to be ending up on my 12th year here soon and serving with these folks for a long time. These are extremely conscientious, well-intended people who are very committed to solving problems. They are. I'm absolutely 100%. And I don't mean this as any show of disrespect to any of you folks, but we are here every other Monday night dealing with issues that relate to the quality of life in this city week in and week out, over and over and over, that don't maybe necessarily directly impact your neighborhood like this one does, but this is a tremendously committed group of extremely qualified professional individuals. All of these suggestions and questions that are coming up in my mind, I just keep coming back to, but do we have enough time? And so my question would turn to AEP, and I would say, what can we do? You know, we're working on this as hard as we possibly can. I understand that whoever this commission is that says you guys got to improve your transmissions line. You have no choice, and you got a hard date. You got to do it by, I would imagine they impose fines or all kinds of other onerous things if you don't meet their dictates, and I get that. And you're working back trying to allow for that. If we're working this hard to try to come up with a reasonable solution for everybody, how much more time? Can you give us more time, and how much more time could you give us to work on these issues?
Sure. So I'll say that we've been working on this for a long time. And we do have an in-service date that we need to meet, which is June 1st of 2022. And what that means is that date just isn't an arbitrary date. There's an expected load on that date that we need to be able to hit. If we don't hit it, we need to have a plan in place of what we do if our lines are over capacity, which could include manually shedding load, which is turning off power so that the line doesn't overload. So that's putting our grid, AEP's lines, in jeopardy, which we're not willing to do. So knowing that we have to file with the siting board in February, which is our target right now, we need to start engineering on a route really a month ago.
That's not what I wanted to hear, Joe.
Right. So it's tough. When you go to the siting board, we have to have a route nailed down 100%. We can't go and change it later. We'd have to submit another application, which then delays our project on the back end. So unfortunately, I think we're there. And again, any suggestion from council we're going to take, we still have to justify the route to the siting board at the end of the day. But we do want to minimize impact. I know it was mentioned earlier that open house that we did was not required. It's required for full applications, not for accelerated applications, which is what we're going to be filing. But we do understand the importance of getting feedback from folks that live here. So we did have that open house because we felt it was right and we needed the input. But at this point, we do need to move forward with the route. So it would be great if we had a recommendation that I think Dublin as a whole agrees on that we could take. But following this meeting, really, we're going to have to start engineering toward a route, toward a solution.
And unless we do something otherwise, your route would be the original 80-foot, 85-foot lot, whatever you call those things, towers, straight down Shire Rings Drive.
We haven't picked one yet. So initially, we considered down Shire Rings all the way to past Starry Fields and then north up into our substation, and then down Shire Rings up Eiderman Road. So those are the two we considered. Hearing all the feedback, I think Dublin brought to us last week, 2 weeks ago, kind of the hybrid up University Boulevard. Originally, we rolled out paralleling University Boulevard closely because when we're following the curve in those roads, there are going to be bigger poles to support the stress on those structures. So they're going to have concrete bases, they're going to be bigger, we're going to have more of them. So we rolled that out. That's a lot more costly. Dublin's brought this kind of the hybrid, the blue line that showed up here to us for us to consider. We say it's feasible, we'll consider it, and give it strong consideration. But so really, I would say any one of those three routes we're looking into. We don't have one picked out yet. We're still getting comments every day. So by February, we'll have one picked out and engineered.
And but for us adopting hybrid, option 3, it's going to be 1 or 2, most likely.
I would say a lot of comments from the public would draw us to consider that as well. It would be great to have city buy-in. So if that answers your question.
It does, thanks. Christina, did you have?
I guess I just have a sort of a difficult question to ask. At the end of the day, all said and done, if AEP were to decide, I'm not saying that you will do this, this is a totally hypothetical. If AEP were to decide, hey, we don't really care what the public says, or we're just going to ignore what the city has asked us to do, we're going to go ahead and we're going to pick our route, and that's just going to be the route, you have the ability to do that.
We do. That's not going to be our choice.
I know that, that's not what I'm saying.
Right.
I guess we are in a difficult situation, is my point.
I'll say our obligation is to deliver power, to make sure that the electric grid is safe and reliable. That's our number one priority. So aside from that, then we move on to, okay, what can we do to minimize impact? What can we do to get everybody on board? Knowing that we have to get a line from A to B, what's the best route to get there? And then on the other end, we're also worried about the electricity bills, so rates. So that's why AEP can't go and pay for the entire underground. It's just not prudent, and we wouldn't get approval for it. So yes, our responsibility is to make the grid reliable.
Let me ask you that final question, and then I'll stop asking questions. If we were to vote to support this hybrid option 3, and so it was roughly this blue line or something very similar to it, and we said to our staff, hey, look, see what you can do to bend it to the north if it's got to be above ground, and get us a price and see what would happen if we tried to go underground for that stretch. Does us asking our staff to get those 2 additional pieces of information slow you down if we otherwise support option 3?
No, and really at this point, we can't be slowed down, so we're going to be moving forward toward a route. I would say if something changes later on, we may consider it. There may be costs associated with that, stopping and restarting. But at this point, we're going to be, full steam ahead working toward a route to make sure that we meet our in-service date that we're mandated to do.
Okay, thank you, Joe, I appreciate it. Any other Jane?
No, well, I'll make the suggestion that, as you said, that we need to take a look at what it costs to bury that. I would like to hear from a consensus that if this line were buried from the point that is at the roundabout to, go back up to your slide again, Megan, to where it bends, at least to where the entrance, let's say, to the University Boulevard Drive comes in on the far west. If the line were buried that far along, would that be something that the Ballantrae residents would feel comfortable with? And can we see a show of hands? Would that be?
How many minutes is it going to take you, Christian? We still have about a 3.5-hour council meeting to do that.
I think to reiterate the feedback from the community at the last meeting we had is the line, whether it's buried or not, so long as it traces more closely to University Boulevard and that bend is eliminated, that is what the residents want. Whether it's above ground or buried, we don't care. We just don't want that bend. Well, hang on. We can't change what we submitted to the city earlier, right? This was an acceptable route above ground with 90-foot poles. They've now dropped them to 65-foot poles, following the route that we told them based on our last meeting was acceptable. Okay? So, and it seems that if tension is put on the lines based upon bends and curves, that a right angle puts a whole lot more pressure on a line than a 45 or less degree curve, right?
With less poles.
With less poles. So straightening that above ground line from where it bends straight south to the circle would cost less, correct, AEP?
A straight line versus an angled line?
or slightly angled line following University Boulevard will cost less than a right angle line.
So a
Remove
right
the
angle
angle.
line is one structure at an angle. If there's a slight bend, that's a bunch of structures at slighter angles, but it's still a bigger structure,
So Joe, something essentially.
regardless of the
Okay.
angle.
I think what you're trying to say, Christian, and I'll try not to put your eye out with this thing, make it to work, is you're essentially saying, looking at this way with more of a
Yes.
bend. Is that what you're?
That is what we brought forward from our neighborhood meeting, and we would accept that above ground or not.
And what I was trying to say earlier is, based on this, we thought we were trying to find that compromise, is what we were trying to find, as best, given all this stuff, to try to figure that out. And that's when I talked about, trying to at least cut that difference. It's not just going to be as true as this, but we'll go back and talk about this and see if we can't get that closer up that.
Right, and I guess from city staffs and time involved, right? I imagine figuring out the cost of bury is a whole lot more effort and a whole lot more time than keeping it above ground.
Probably the specifics of what you find out there actually under the dirt is a different issue, but generally speaking, a structural idea of what the price is per linear foot would give us an idea. Here's what I'm going to suggest. I think because of we're all in, everybody, if you look at this from everybody else's perspective, everybody's in a difficult position. AEP's got this, whatever they call this board, breathing down your neck, saying you better be ready to go, and if you're not, you're going to have to be shutting down. That's not a good position to be in. So you've got to put these things someplace. The residents are in a bad position because obviously, where they live and their proximity to this. The city, we didn't come up with this idea. We're trying to adjust and adapt and deal with it as best we can. What I personally believe, and I'm sure half of the people are going to be upset with me, and I hope I can get to the other half not being so upset, is I think we need to support Route 3, however, which gives AEP the direction that they need to keep this process moving. This is not a deadline that they have imposed, but it's been imposed upon them. And if we can start moving forward with that, but direct our staff to continue to work to try to above ground bend that line to the north, or investigate what would it be to put it underground across there to solve the developability issues. Is that?
So, is that a motion?
Yeah, well, it is, but I want to get Dana's reaction. Is that something that we can do, or can we not do?
Oh, I can, if I tell you, a mile and a half is running about 10 to 12 million bucks. I don't know what so it's going to be that simple of an analysis, okay? It's going to be that simple from our end, from the city's end.
How about just-
We'll ask, excuse me, what? A mile and a half will run somewhere between.
Is that a mile and a half?
A mile and a half will run somewhere, well, actually, it's bracketed somewhere between 10 to 16 million dollars, but until we bid it, right? I think that's the number we got. What was the number we got on the Shire Rings barrier?
Surely there's a scale out there somewhere.
I think what you asked, right?
Hang on, bear with me.
I don't think he understands this one.
There was a number AEP gave us, and it was bracketed. We were thinking it was going to be 5 to 6 million off some early numbers we got. That's what we were trying to brief burying Shire Rings portion off of that, because we thought, okay, we can try to make that number happen. If you're talking about burying there, I mean, minimally, the numbers that we got back were far north of $5 to $6 million. It was almost somewhere between double to triple the number.
Just for that portion, and I'm not suggesting.
So that's all I'm
would-
saying. That's the kind of number we're.
Dana, just to be sure we're communicating, burying, as if you were going to make a triangle out of that dip now, right? So moving it up along University and moving it down and burying that section.
Yeah,
You're saying that's a mile and a half?
Yeah, you're talking about burying this section. All I'm saying is the mile and a half was,
Is that a mile and a half?
no, okay. What I said was our previous reference was a mile and a half from this point down. Can you put the other route up, Megan? What we were talking about before was the 5 to 6 million we thought we were talking about back before when we were looking at this burial option along Shire Rings Road. We thought early on was a $5 to $6 million number. That number got doubled to tripled, and then I verified that, as I mentioned early in the meeting, that's about right. So all I'm saying is, I'm not saying that's 1.5 miles, gang. I think you'll regret that move, frankly, just because you're going to have these big hideous riser poles in the short distance.
You know what, Dana, and my-
Here, we could have hid those riser poles.
Right, and my question,
all I'm-
Dave,
that's-
my suggestion did not imply an answer. I was saying, and it could be that when you show us that, I mean, two 90-foot riser, big honking, things only 1/2 mile apart from each other may be worse than 65 with a few that are closer together. I don't know. I can't visualize that. All I'm suggesting is if we at least committed to this route in concept, we have checked the AEP box, but still left us.
Yeah, I'm saying we can absolutely answer that. That's just kind of where it's going to go. We can answer.
And also a
Okay,
bending
that's-
as far as you can with the suggestions that Chris made about the right-of-way and all of that. If we could see that, maybe if we had an opportunity at the next meeting to then visit that issue, maybe then we can finalize, but we can send them with Route 3, and at least we've accomplished something.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what else.
Is that a motion?
I think if we can, yes, if Route 3 means pushing that up closer to the alignment of University Boulevard one way or the other, yes.
We're
Understanding,
looking
though,
at
it might be as best, it
Or
might be
bury
as
it.
good as it gets right now.
Right.
You could,
Okay.
be,
Well-
I don't know.
I think you have to, we need more information.
So is that a motion?
But at least we are moving against option 3.
Okay.
Then I guess we'll make that a motion to approve Route 3 for AEP's purposes and direct staff to investigate 3 options. What is proposed now? Could they possibly bend it further to the north with other
Some
creative solutions?
adjustments to northern
Adjustments, the most
boundary.
adjustments we could make and possibly give us a visual, and then at least flush out the issue of burial, just so that we know what we're dealing with.
I'll second that.
Ann?
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Groom?
Yes.
Okay.
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 Mayor, thank you for
Yeah.
that, although I would like some direction as it relates to the potential burial of distribution east of Avery Road. We've heard from landowners there equally about the height and so forth. So exploration of that.
I would make a motion that we direct staff to explore that option as well.
Okay,
Of
and
the
that-
distribution lines.
The
Right, the
distribution
distribution
lines, because
lines.
it's going to help with the transmission line, and it's also going to help with other
Right,
issues.
and we'll bring that number back to you and how that would have to be funded
Yes.
Absolutely.
as part of that.
Okay, I make that motion. Is there a second? Ann?
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Groom?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Thank you. We're going to take a 10-minute break.
Thank you, residents.
Take anything to eat back there?
So what was just approved?
What was approved? Three meaning that we're going to push for. In other words, let them know that we're looking at this route, not the other first 2 options. That we're pushing to get it closer to University Boulevard. So they can think about looking at it that way. We're looking at costs for underground as well as the possibility of bringing it above ground as far as
As far as security, you get to
I agree with you.
ugly poles.
I think for all of us, what we're hoping for is to move them as far away. So I haven't heard, I can't tell you, but I know that if I'm sitting in a car in Charlotte, and I'm
Really appreciate it.
So, do you know what scared me? The final thing AEP said they can do what they want to do.
Well, here's the issue, and this is why I
They're
asked
gonna
the
do what they
question
wanna
that
do.
I didn't want to say. We are in a corner. And honestly, if they wanted to tell us to go F off, we're going to do it our way, they could do it.
Yes, oh, no.
Okay, we will reconvene the city council meeting and proceed on with our, the balance of our agenda. Just so everyone knows, the MORPC presentation is going to be rescheduled to a future council meeting. Citizen comments, I hope no citizen raises their hand. I don't see any. Paul, you got anything as a citizen to thank you? Moving right along the consent agenda, there's only one item, so I make a motion that we approve the minutes of November the 14th. Is there a second?
Second.
Ann?
Yes.
Ms. Saludo?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grimm?
Yes.
Did I mess that up, Ann? Because it says two items, but there's only one.
No, I'm not, no, we missed that.
Okay, so we're good. Postponed items, Resolution 61-19,
Appointing members to the Historic Dublin Vision Task Force.
and I think we had an amended resolution at our,
We have a resolution, yes.
yeah. So does everybody have a copy of this?
Introducing, yes.
And I will introduce it. And Dana?
So, this is the postponed item, I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is
Can I
the
get my-
postponed,
okay.
this is the historic.
I feel like I need to be in
Vision.
bed already. So anyway, I want to thank Councilmember Fox for her partnership in trying to identify willing residents to participate in this. I think where we're at is we have identified as many as we can. There still may be a couple more to fill the billet, and I would ask that we, perhaps add those at a later date. But for right now, in order to get things moving, we'd like to go ahead and ask that you approve those names that have been advanced to you so that we can at least get on with business as soon as we can after the first of the year. Councilmember Fox, I don't know if you want to add anything to that or not.
I just want to add that we try very hard to get a representation, a broad representation, and ask people who have not participated in things that much before. So there are different voices, and there are broader voices, and there's youth voices, and it represents not only residents outside of the historic district, but landowners in the historic district, business owners in the historic districts, and residents of the historic district. So it's going to be a nice, diverse group.
Great. Any other questions or comments from council?
Absolutely not.
Ann?
Ms. Saludo?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grimm?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Bossa?
Yes.
Second reading on ordinances, ordinance 67-19, Ann?
Authorizing the city manager to enter into a real estate transfer and development agreement and infrastructure agreement for the development of the Corners development in the city and for construction of certain related infrastructure and park improvements, authorizing execution of various related agreements and documents.
Donna?
Good evening, members of council. Since the first reading, staff, along with the legal team, has continued to work with the developer to refine the terms of the real estate transfer and development agreement, as well as the infrastructure agreement, and you'll see those changes reflected in the documents in your packet. Many of the revisions made are editorial in nature. However, there are a few changes that we'd like to bring to your attention as outlined in the memo, and I'll just work through those. The first is in regard to the transfer of property. The language as modified allows for the transfer of city-owned property to occur upon approval of the preliminary rather than the final development plan. And this will allow the developer to access the site to begin general site work and excavation and create some activity and interest in the property. The important piece to remember is that the clock begins ticking when the property transfers. So, for example, in sub-area B1 along France Road, Daimler has 3 years from the date of transfer to develop it before it reverts to the city. And further, should the Daimler Group sell any portion of the property to include areas B1, B2, or B3 within 10 years of the date of transfer, the city will be reimbursed at a cost of $84,406 per acre. Moving on, the second item is in regard to the establishment of the project fund. Staff proposes that the developer be obligated to expend their contribution, which is $1.765 million, prior to any release of city funds. Again, this is to secure the developer's investment in the site and the project. And the final item is in regard to the repayment schedule from the city to the developer for the remaining balance of the public improvements and the elimination of the minimum service payment. In refining the model, staff feels that the TIF can support a $250,000 payment rather than a $229,000 repayment in the first 3 years, and then scale down the repayment to $200,000 for the next 3 years with a $100,000 final payment. As originally proposed, the city will still reserve the right to prepay at any time without penalty. Staff believes that these proposed revised terms will deliver a project that aligns with council's desire to promote development of the France Road corridor, as well as support the principles of the Dublin Corporate Area Plan. Therefore, staff recommends that council approve the business terms of both the real estate transfer and development agreement and the infrastructure agreement with the Daimler Group, and further seeks authorization to revise the final agreements consistent with council's direction. The developer's representative, Paul Gadati, as well as members of the project and legal teams are available to answer any questions you may have.
Questions from council? Mr. Gadati, anything you want to say? Standing silent? Okay. Okay, hearing none. Ann?
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms? Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
68-19?
Amending ordinance number 8300 passed June 19, 2000, is subsequently amended to supplement the public improvements to be made to benefit the property identified in that ordinance.
Matt?
There are no changes to this ordinance from the first hearing.
Questions from council? Hearing none. Ann?
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms? Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Ordinance 69-19?
Declaring the improvement to certain parcels of real property known as the Corners Development to be a public purpose, exempt from taxation, providing for the collection, deposit of service payments, and specifying the purposes for which those service payments may be expended, specifying the public infrastructure improvements directly benefiting the parcels, authorizing compensation payments to the Dublin City School District and the Tolles Career and Technical Center, and repealing ordinance number 8300.
Matt?
Again, no changes.
Any questions from council? Hearing none. Ann?
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
We are going to do, at Claudia's request, she came up here and insisted that we do ordinance 70-19 and resolution 70-19 together. Look at that, it's even on the slide, Claudia. She
What
knew
if you
for
just said
sure
no,
she would say,
Greg?
Yeah, I don't know what I'd do, we'd say no.
I was trying to catch me off guard, so I was trying to prepare.
So rezoning approximately 13.5 acres, more or less located west of France, north of Rings Road and south of Paul Blazer Parkway from OLR to PUD, Plan Unit Development District, the corners for the future development of up to 70,000 square feet for commercial and office uses in a public park, and resolution
70-19.
70-19 is approving and accepting the plat for the corner subdivision.
I will introduce that resolution, Ann.
All right.
Claudia?
Good evening again, and thank you very much for helping me out here doing this together. The ordinance was introduced at your last meeting, and we did do a quick amendment to clarify that architectural language in the development text, which is on the top of page 7, to more closely align the intent of what that architecture ought to be as it transitions to the west. So that is why that ordinance is before you as an amendment to that development text. And just a quick reminder, we've seen this in all the ordinances regarding this project here. So there are no changes to the plan, just to the text. And then the resolution is for the acceptance of the proposed preliminary plat, which is typically what accompanies a legislation ordinance for a PUD rezoning. And the applicant is proposing with the city together to subdivide the land into 3 lots. So it would be the existing parking lot that the city will retain ownership of is one of the lots. And then the park, which is in the center of this map here, which the city will also retain ownership of, will be a lot. And then the remaining lot is the parcel to be developed by Daimler in the future. Both of those were recommended for approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission on September the 19th, and staff is also recommending approval of both the ordinance and the resolution tonight. And I am here to any questions.
Any questions from council on either of those 2 items? Hearing none, first vote on ordinance 70-19. Oh, I'm sorry, Jane?
I'm sorry, it was not on one of those two questions, but it's just a very quick question. On scale and massing in the development text, on the two-story office buildings that serve as a transition, the one, and we've talked about that being more rural, it says that they can be monolithic in scale and massing. And the only reason I'm asking that is that that seems a little narrow in what the secondary forms are encouraged to add interest, and those being window bays and entry elements. So are we limiting those buildings to be monolithic, or is there more room for flexibility there? It says may be monolithic.
Exactly, so that is where the flexibility would come in, and that would be something that the Planning Commission definitely has wiggle room to determine appropriateness.
We talk about complementary architecture. Were we able to capture all of that in?
Yeah, she did do that. They did put that in. It's just that when it said monolithic, I just wanted to be sure that there was flexibility, that it wasn't a requirement that it is a monolith, because I know we look for distinctive architecture. That's one of the things that we're always open to. And I was a little curious as to why it was so narrow in the word monolithic.
I'm assuming it goes toward where you have more ins and outs for the bays for retail. In an office building, you probably wouldn't have that so much in the form and the scale of the building. So that's why it's under that massing section as well.
But the intent is not to be that, I mean, there's flexibility is what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, that's fine.
Is that it? Okay, and on ordinance 70-19.
Mr. Keenan? Mr. Bosa?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Ms. Fox? Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes, and on resolution 70-19.
Ms. Fox? Mr. Keenan? Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Bosa?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Ordinance 71-19.
Establishing appropriations based on the 2020 operating budget of the City of Dublin, State of Ohio, for the fiscal year ending December 31, 2020.
Matt,
Again, no changes from the first hearing.
questions from council?
None.
Hearing none. Ann?
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Ms. Fox? Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Ordinance 72-19.
Amending the annual appropriations for the fiscal year ending December 31, 2019.
Matt?
There are 2 points worth noting when discussing this ordinance since the first reading. The first is that in your packet was a memo providing some additional information on the advances contained in the ordinance and how they will impact the general fund balance policy. I also wanted to point out that it's important to note that the fund balance, the general fund expenditures, and the timeline provided in that memo are all estimates. They're there for representative purposes. The second is that the ordinance has been amended since its introduction. The amended ordinance requests $145,000 in the accrued leave payout instead of the $90,000 previously requested. Since the ordinance was drafted in mid-November, additional information outlined in the memo has come to light, and it's become necessary to make this additional request. I'm available to answer any questions.
Questions from council? Kathy?
Thank you, Matt. Matt and I had a bit of a conversation about the policy discussion that we began to have at the last council meeting about the end-of-year fund balance and the minimum required per policy. And as Matt noted, the timeline that's presented in there puts the annual sort of balance sort of around 54.9%. Bringing it back up in February should there be a bond proceed or a bond issuance. And that timing could change depending on a variety of things, and the amount could change depending on a variety of things. So I think it still would be a useful thing to do next year to sort of look at the policy of the amount of time, if the policy says we can advance based on a future bond, what that funding could look like and what that policy, because this is really sort of the first time we've come here. Given the conversation that we have, even if we don't do it in February, it looks like that fund balance will continue to rise because of the way the revenues come in. So that makes sense, but I do think that should be something we should talk about in a future meeting I think that would be important. So if the rest of council feels that way, I think that that should be brought forward. And the other thing that I would ask then related to that is, Matt, maybe at the next meeting, could we see what the encumbrances balances look like? I know we had one of those schedules last year as well, and the CIP balances. So as we're looking at these fund levels, I think it would be useful to have some of that data. Again, not to hold it up, but I think as we begin that next year, given this, I think those would be two very useful tools, and hopefully we've developed those, because those we have seen a couple times, so if that would make sense. So that would be my request. Thank you.
Okay.
Got it? Anything else? Jane, anything?
My only comments to that are the but-for comments in the memo is, the exceptions of, I agree that warrants a conversation, because there's a lot of but-for comments in that memo. And, you want to allow room for the unusual, but unusual things happen every year, so you don't know how much weight to put in an anomaly, when there's going to be an anomaly every year, it's just going to be a different anomaly, and I think that does warrant a conversation. So I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the policy is pretty silent on a lot of the issues, which I think is probably okay for a policy, but we should discuss your expectations regarding that silence and whether that silence is really appropriate in all cases.
Great, thank you. That's perfect.
Anything else from anybody? Ann?
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Ordinances, first reading, ordinance 73-19.
Adopting Chapter 122 under Title 11 of the City of Dublin Codified Ordinances to regulate short-term rental facilities.
I'll introduce it.
Jennifer?
I'm going to turn it over to Thad Boggs.
Thad.
Go over a short presentation.
Good evening, members of council. The ordinance in front of you today has been the product of actually a number of years of study of this topic and a few revisions that have come through the Community Development Committee over the last few months. Obviously, this industry has grown from nothing just a decade or a little more than that ago to now being very prominent. And what has caused us to revisit these efforts has been concerns, I'll say, that have been raised by residents within the community over the last several months due to persistent problems with short-term rental units in their neighborhood. So we went through the Community Development Committee twice, and the ordinance that is in front of council this evening received a positive recommendation at the committee meeting November 6th of 2019. So what it does in a nutshell is it creates a new chapter of your codified ordinances in your business regulation code, and it requires registration of all people who wish to operate short-term rentals and limits the maximum number of nights that a property may be rented as a short-term rental to 14 nights in a calendar year. So that's not consecutive nights, but any 14 nights throughout a calendar year is the maximum. The reason that there is a distinction between the 14 nights and capping that transient guest definition at 30 days is, A, that is what is used in state law and in the hotel motel tax to define transient guests. And also it avoids bringing in traditional residential tenancies that may be month to month or annual. There is a yearly registration fee of $225, and working with staff, it was concluded that that would at least be the cost of administering in terms of preparing and receiving applications and also enforcing this code. It will require, and part of this comes from suggestions of residents as well as the committee, name and contact information of the homeowner or resident, so it can't be an absentee person who is operating this or a rental tenant who is operating this without the permission of the property owner. Names of all hosting platforms as well as other methods of advertisement. So Airbnb is a hosting platform. It is involved in facilitating that transaction versus advertising something on Craigslist or in the classified ads. would be more of an advertisement rather than actually involved in the transaction. Both types of entities have to be listed in the registration application, and the person requesting registration has to attest that they are complying with all local, state, and federal health and safety type of codes that would apply. Prior to each individual rental, so this is in addition to the annual registration, a person has to say when the property is going to be rented, the maximum number of guests that will be there, and provide a 24/7 local contact, so that if there are problems with parties or littering or noise, that there is somebody that can be contacted by code enforcement staff and be accountable to that. I already mentioned that it requires the host to be the full-time owner or full-time resident or owner of the unit. Records have to be maintained, and it does provide the ability for registrations to be denied or revoked if this becomes a problem applicant who has demonstrated an inability to operate this type of short-term rental responsibly. Prohibits transfer of the registration, so if the property changes hands, the new property owner has to come in again. Also prohibits discrimination, and it allows the enforcement mechanism would be through planning and the code enforcement process. First violation is an unclassified misdemeanor. We discussed this some at the committee. It was determined that that $250 fine was significant enough to send a message of a need to comply with the ordinance, but not so onerous as to be burdensome to somebody who just didn't know and sort of stumbled into noncompliance with the ordinance. However, subsequent convictions do elevate to a third-degree misdemeanor. There is a possibility of jail time with those. I don't think that jail time is really intended to be imposed except for real repeat offenders, but that does provide the opportunity for community control sanctions, which may have conditions attached and allow ongoing monitoring through that court system. So I tried to get through that quickly. Any questions from council?
You know what, I know that this committee did a lot of work on that. I appreciate that very much. And most of this stuff is always kind of complaint-driven in enforcement.
That is correct.
Is it going to be on our, I tapped on our Go Dublin thing here. Will that option be there to report some kind of, like, how would we phrase that to let people know this is what the rules are? And if you think someone on your street's violating that, take a picture of the front of their house with these cars and report it. Is that going to be an option on our Go Dublin enforcement thing?
I don't know about the specific Go Dublin. I can tell you that from, we have had meetings already about how we would actually go about enforcing that. And I think building the registration piece online, as well as publicizing the existence of the ordinance and publicizing the ability to communicate those complaints
The
is a
conversations we
priority.
had circulated around rentals for the Memorial Tournament. So there's an entire online application that happens if you're renting anything for the Memorial Tournament. And we had really talked about using that same platform to do this, and it's a pretty simple one to navigate. Of how we would let people know that this is a requirement, that's going to be probably the hardest piece of this. And there aren't so many that probably we could scrub the hosting website forums and send a message to those people and say, hello, this is City of Dublin. We realize that you have this rental available. Want to make sure that you're aware of what our city code is. Here's a link.
And we have a service
Exactly.
that pulls all news articles for Dublin from a lot of different sources, don't we, Ann? Pretty much.
Pardon me?
Just say yes.
We have a source that pulls all news articles.
Problem here.
It pulls all news articles that relate to Dublin. Isn't there some service that we have that does that?
There is.
Yeah, and so we could do the same thing with the Airbnb or what have you. The other thing, it'd be interesting to hear what Ron Whittington would say about, should there be an insurance requirement in here of some kind? I don't see anything that mentions it, but that could be something he could address maybe for next meeting.
Well, and I can tell you just from my, I'm not an insurance expert, but many ordinances do have insurance requirements. Some are $300,000 general liability, some are $1 million. At least my estimation of that from the perspective of somebody trying to write municipal code was that when you have the risk that is being distributed between the guest and the operator, leaving it to that, the parties to that transaction to set the appropriate amount rather than.
The owner of the property is the one that's going to really, at the end of the day, take the fall. If there's a smoke alarm that's not working, you have death in there, any number of incidents that could happen, a deck fails, falls, they're going to go after it. And I would submit to you that most carriers aren't going to be interested in a rental issue in any event, but it's certainly not on any kind of long-term basis.
And that may well be, and that's part of the reason why.
Why don't you ask Ron about it and bring it up at the next meeting? Wouldn't the applications be a public record, and couldn't they be online?
They are intended to be online, yes.
Okay, good.
Anything else? Ladies?
I have a question, because it may come up in the future. I've noticed that this applies to both residential and commercial areas, so it's citywide, correct? How do the short-term rental rules apply to bed and breakfasts, in case in the historic district someone decides to open one?
So what I would say to that is, in the zoning code, the bed and breakfast is defined as providing lodging accommodations and accessory services, including meals, sales of gift items. So I think that there is a use difference there than what the typical short-term rental, as we are considering it, is. The other component of bed and breakfast, under state code, if you have 5 or more rooms that are offered as guest rooms, then that falls under provision of the state fire code that regulates hotels, motels, and bed and breakfasts. So once you get into that realm, I think there's a distinction, or I would draw a distinction there between those professional type of operations and the short-term rentals that are contemplated in this document.
But Jane makes a really good point, and rather than us having a really good legal argument if we ever got sued, couldn't we put a line in there that says this ordinance does not apply to bed and breakfast as defined in our code?
We could do that.
Can't we just come right
And
out and
just
say it?
be-
'Cause you're right, what if somebody wants to open a tube?
Well, the thing you don't want to see happen is you don't want a loophole where someone decides that their short-term rental is now a bed and breakfast. So they are allowed in certain, bed and breakfast are allowed within certain commercial areas.
Bed and breakfasts are allowed in 2 districts, the Historic Core and Historic South, Bridge Street District.
Right.
Historic Core and Historic
Right.
South.
That ends it,
There is an Airbnb in a historic home in downtown Dublin now, but it would never apply as a bed and breakfast because it's very tiny. So I was curious about the historic district, and I asked this of Jennifer, but about whether or not, because we have a historic district and we expect tourism, there's an Airbnb down there, and that will be gone. But you can't differentiate. It has to be citywide, so.
Right. This, as a business regulation requiring registration in those components, it is citywide.
Citywide, okay.
When they can register, they can still operate as that,
No, well.
14 nights. So
For 14 nights, right, for 14 nights. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how will you, okay, I'm sorry.
No, he did a nice job pulling together all the different strings and the audience comments to make this
One other quick
prevalent.
question.
Thank you.
On the Muirfield a piece, because people have people coming and going in their houses, right? So you have a number here. Is there really a maximum number of how many people? Because on the Muirfield weekend, you might have 20, 30 people coming
Well,
through
these
your
are overnight guests, not daytime
Okay,
guests.
I'm sorry. Yeah, okay, so it only applies to overnight guests. It doesn't.
Correct. Because that has been the focus of the complaints that we have received, are these parties going late into the night, Uber traffic on residential cul-de-sacs, that sort of activity.
All right, thank you.
All right, we'll see you back on.
Just wait, really,
Oh,
can I, I'm
Christina.
sorry.
Sure, sorry.
So you talk about it prohibits discrimination. I just want to make sure that in what sense? In the federal standard, or does it also include LGBTQ discrimination? And how would they know how to complain?
It does include sexual orientation
Okay.
discrimination as being prohibited. That would likewise be a violation that could be reported to code enforcement, just like
Gotcha.
a noisy party.
And then, so if someone is a repeat offender and they have their license revoked or whatever, is there a period of time for which that would be revoked, or just permanently per owner?
Right, there is the ability to deny ongoing requests.
So they could request again, and we could approve it, but there's nothing that says like, as long as you own this home for the next 3 years, you can't even apply. They could just apply and we'd just deny them.
Right.
Got it. Okay, thanks. I just needed the clarification.
Anything else? All right, we'll see you back on January 6th on that. Thanks, Thad.
Thank you.
Resolution 67-19.
Accepting the lowest and best bid for the sanitary sewer extension areas 4B, 4C, water line extensions areas 4B, 4C, and Bright Road cul-de-sac project.
I will introduce it. Paul.
Members of council, this resolution is for a project that will provide water and sanitary sewer services to the Bright Road area, including Grandy Cliffs Drive and Genmark Court. This is the second utility extension project to be implemented. This project also includes the construction of the cul-de-sac at the Riverside Drive and Bright Road intersection. The last 4 acquisitions of property for this project were adopted by council in October of this year. On November 20th of this year, 4 bids were received, publicly opened and read. For this project, we did receive competitive bids. The engineer's estimate for this project was $2.8 million, while the available funding, as detailed in the staff report, was $2,795,000. A lead excavating company of Ohio Incorporated submitted the lowest and best bid of $2,588,607.70. Construction activities are anticipated to start in early 2020. Access to all the properties will be maintained during construction. The project is scheduled for substantial completion by July 31st of next year. This work is to be complete before the opening of the new Hopewell Elementary School. Previous experience with a lead excavating company on a previous waterline project in 2017 was very good, and they did excellent work. And with that, staff recommends approval of this resolution. Be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Questions from council? Hearing none. Ann?
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Yes. Ms. Fox? Yes. Mr. Reiner? Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Resolution 68-19.
Accepting the lowest and best bid for the 2019 sanitary manhole rehabilitation program.
I will introduce it. Paul.
Even more quickly and even more simply, and this is the last bid from engineering this year, so yippee. The 2019 sanitary sewer manhole rehabilitation program is just that. It provides for the repair of 136 manholes throughout the city. The estimate for the project was $300,000, which was also the same as the available funding. Municipal Contractor Sealing Products Incorporated submitted the lowest and best bid of $199,955. Again, we did have competitive bids. This project will commence in December, expected to be complete by July 1st of next year. Traffic will be maintained in all areas throughout the duration of the project. Our previous experience with this contractor has been very good. We've used them for several years in the past. Staff does recommend approval of this resolution this evening. We'd be glad to answer any questions you might
Any
have.
questions from council?
I have just one. It talks about the work includes structural repair, internal chimney seals, and cementuous grouting and lining. Will there be any elevation adjustments made? Many of these manholes are actually at an incorrect elevation.
Yes, we do adjustments to the top of castings as necessary. So we'll put either adjusting rings on it if it's in a low area and it's, holding water, so absolutely.
Okay,
Anything else, Chris?
that's all I had.
Anybody else? Hearing none. Ann?
Ms. Fox? Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner? Yes. Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Thank you. Resolution 69-19.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into a contract with and execute a guaranteed maximum price amendment with Turner Construction Company, construction manager at risk for the construction of the Riverside Crossing Park project.
I will introduce it. Matthew?
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Resolution 6919 is to authorize the execution of construction agreement with Turner Construction Company. This is a construction manager at risk contract for the Riverside Crossing Park East Phase 1 project, which includes the upper and lower plaza construction work, the restroom pavilion facility, the water features, seating, landscaping in and all around the plaza areas. What it does not include is the Phase 2 section of this, which is the lawn area, the shared use paths, and some of the restoration work on the west side of the river. That part of the project is programmed into the 2021 capital improvement budget. So the construction for the contract before you this evening is expected to begin within a few weeks of the execution of the contract. The amount of the guaranteed maximum price contract is in the amount of $12,956,921. Staff has thoroughly reviewed the pricing and is recommending approval. I'm glad to answer any questions.
Any questions from council?
Quick question. What do you have any idea what you think the premium was in terms, I mean, I think the guaranteed maximum price contracts are a really excellent way to do business. I'm just curious if you have a presence of mind what the premium would be for that.
I don't know the answer to that.
You know what I'm asking. In other words, I know we probably pay a little more knowing that if we have overruns or whatever, that it's on them.
That's right.
We have a budgeted item that we can count on. But typically in that scenario, you're going to pay, and I don't need the answer tonight, but if somebody could just,
I would imagine on a project like this, that's a pretty big number.
yep, that's
We
what
can
I'm.
follow up with you on that with more details.
Again, it's a great way on the larger projects to guarantee it and get the budget.
There are a lot of moving parts, complex situations.
If I'm the
with this project,
contractor, I'm
so-
being really, really careful. They're putting a bond up for that.
Which is one of the reasons why we went to at risk.
Yeah, okay.
Kathy?
I had one quick question. We just approved an increase in the 2019 appropriation from, 10.9 to 14 million. This is roughly 13 million. What is the other million?
There are several other, what we call soft costs associated with the project that we will be paying for outside of this contract associated with the actual construction work. Some of those things are add-on projects that we want to consider down the road that we may add into the actual site work itself. But by and large, there are contingency factors in play that we need to make sure that we're covering all kinds of errors or places where we might be able to add on change orders and such that we can fit into the actual project itself. We need to make sure we have that funding available.
$1 million in the,
Yes.
okay.
Jane?
It's been a while since we've seen the master plan when it first came out, and now we're 90% through. Has there been any major changes or anything that you've had to cut out or do differently in this phase that we may or may not be aware of?
No, you would have seen a memo in last meeting's council packet that outlined some of the modifications that we've made from the 60 to 90% plans. None of them were significant in scope. There were some material adjustments here, size of granite, that kinds of things. We found that we were creating more costs and inefficiencies with the way it was originally at 60%. For instance, just as an example, we were burying a significant amount of granite underground. So by creating platforms on which for them to sit, it created a cost savings and things of that nature. So nothing major.
And I know in the second phase that's coming, there was a lot of discussion about I know this hasn't really to do with this particular piece, but about how the area along Riverside Drive is being treated with the swings and the landscaping. Has any of that changed, or is all of that still in the plans for the future?
No, it's in the site plan that was approved. It's not programmed in the capital budget yet. The lawn space areas, the shared use paths, the lighting, some of the overlook areas that were redesigned, those are included in the next phase in 2021. Okay. What you're referring to is what we call the promenade area along Riverside. That is not yet programmed, but we will bring that forward at the upcoming capital budget hearings.
That sounds good. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Ann?
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Resolution 71-19. Ann?
Authorizing the city manager to enter into a contract with and execute a guaranteed maximum price amendment with Bruce Silly Construction Company, Inc., construction manager at risk for Phase 2 of the Dublin 5555 Perimeter Drive renovation construction project.
I will introduce it. Megan?
Good evening, members of council. The renovation and construction process for the new City Hall and council chambers is designed to deliver the administrative offices in the existing 5555 Perimeter Drive building and the new council chambers addition in phases. On November 18, 2019, City Council authorized the initial phase of renovations to the existing building, and Russilli plans to begin on-site construction activities later this week, probably on Wednesday after the open house that we're holding tomorrow evening. Russilli completed its competitive bidding process for the second phase of work in late November. This second phase includes the balance of the renovation work to the existing buildings, such as drywall, painting, finished carpentry, and electrical. This phase also includes purchase of equipment that has long lead times and preparatory work that's necessary for the construction of the council chambers addition. This resolution establishes the second phase, guaranteed maximum price in the amount of $1,504,388. And a third amendment to the GMP will encompass the balance of the council chambers construction addition work, and that's planned to be presented to council next May of 2020. Construction of the new council chambers addition is currently anticipated to be complete in the spring, summer of 2021. We've thoroughly reviewed the pricing, and we recommend approval of this resolution. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions from council? Hearing none, and there is an open house tomorrow night, 5 o'clock.
Tomorrow evening, 5 to 7.
5 till...
Yes.
Ann?
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Under the other portion of our agenda, AEP, we have already done. Update to Chapter 33, Human Resources Policies. Home.
Good evening, members of council. Subsection 33.07 of Chapter 33, Human Resources Policies of the City Code of Ordinances provides the process by which the chapter is amended. It calls for amendments to be reported to council, and unless council amends or disapproves such amendments, or they are contrary to the city charter, the amendment shall go into effect in 30 days after such report. The amendment cited in this report would bring Chapter 33 in line with previous city council approved actions in the non-union compensation ordinance. Specifically, the following positions are added or amended under the unclassified service. The 2 deputy city manager positions, the chief operating officer and chief finance and development officer, the assistant city manager / chief strategy and innovation officer, and the director of performance analytics. The position of director of strategic initiatives / special projects officer is eliminated. And finally, the position of deputy chief of police is added to the list of personnel requiring a 1-year probationary period when appointed. Subject to any questions council may have, staff recommends the amendments articulated in the report be allowed to go into effect in 30 days.
So if we do nothing, Jen, they go into effect. Does anybody want to do anything? We're going to do nothing, Homer.
Thank you, council, for doing
Our
nothing.
specialty.
We are so good at doing that. Okay, on the council committee reports, we're going to start with Mike and finance. Hotel, motel, grant recommendations.
The Finance Committee met on November 13th. We heard a number of applicants. We also did not hear from a number of applicants, which were pretty much dismissed in terms of what numbers were granted to them. The following hotel motel tax grant recommendations totaling $203,785 were made. And I don't know if you, Ann, do I need to go through all these? You've got them in front of you. Arthritis Foundation, 10, Club Ohio Soccer, 5,000, Crawford Hoyne Foundation, Dublin Market, not to exceed 15,000, Crawford Hoyne Foundation, 4Fest, not to exceed 22,000. Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, cost of city services not to exceed 500. Dublin AM Rotary and HDBA not to exceed 2,000 is itemized in the grant app. Dublin Arts Council not to exceed 20,000. Dublin Jerome High School senior class, cost of city services not to exceed $1,685. Dublin Music Boosters, cost of city services not to exceed $1,100. Dublin Cellular Lacrosse Boosters, cost of city services not to exceed $3,000. Dublin Soccer League not to exceed $9,000 is itemized in the grant app. Dublin Special Olympics not to exceed $2,000. Dublin United Soccer Club, cost of city services not to exceed $5,000. DYA, cost of city services not to exceed $20,000. The Historic Dublin Business Association, community engagement not to exceed $50,000. It's noteworthy that some of these, including HDBA, asked for more, and we went through. We had pretty close tabs on the numbers we were looking at. So some of them got haircuts. You may hear from them, but we were working with a limited amount of money. Kiwanis, 5,000. Ohio Premier Soccer Club, cost of city services not to exceed $7,500. World Archery not to exceed $25,000. And I think we had some issues with World Archery in terms of flying arrows ending up in Amazon or someplace. And they're looking into that as part of the the grant request, we asked that Ron Whittington be significantly involved in that, which he will. So that's the list, and we are looking for that's the Finance Committee's recommendations.
Is that a motion, Mike?
That is a motion.
I'll second.
Yeah, I just want to ask, hey, Mike, I just want to ask you a question, because I noticed in here that HDBA was given 2,000 with Rotary, and then later on it was 50. Is that correct? Were there two separate asks there? Is that?
HDBA?
Yeah, it says, Dublin, it says Dublin.
The Rotary and then.
Rotary and HDBA, not to exceed 2,000, and then below HDBA
This was the car
is,
show. This
pardon?
is the car show, right?
Is the car show? I'm just curious. as to-
Yeah, I see that. I mean, the grant, as I recall, was to Rotary. I'm not sure why, and HDBA is in there.
I think they were partnering.
But
They were
probably-
partnering, they were
They partnering?
partnering together, but that's a completely separate one than the HDBA.
Yeah, it is.
Gotcha.
I
Okay.
think their request was
Yeah.
75,000, as I recall.
Yeah. And just out of curiosity, did the Historic Society have a grant app in there? Or did they ever ask any for
Did who?
money? Historic Society?
No.
Dublin, they
They
didn't
did
ask?
not.
Okay,
In fact, I don't recall seeing one in the past either.
okay, yeah, all right. I have to talk to them about that.
Got a motion and a second.
Ms. Saludo?
Yes.
Ms. Fox? Mayor Peterson? Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
And the rest of the committees are not listed on our agenda, but I'm going to try to do it by memory. Ann gave me a cheat sheet, but I turned it over to see if I can do it. Public Services, Christine.
Nothing.
Dublin Friendship Village.
Does anybody have anything? Raise your hand.
Yeah, let's do it
No, I
then.
want to see if I can do that. Dublin Board of Education.
Nothing.
We had a meeting this evening. You'll be getting a rules of order update. We are still working on the code of conduct. That is still in the sausage process. That's all I have.
John, Community Development.
You heard it tonight already.
How about Dublin Arts Council?
Nothing.
Kathy, Logan Union Champaign County Regional Planning Commission.
Nothing.
US 33 corridor.
I think we meet not till after the holiday.
You thought I forgot Morpsey. Do you have anything about Morpsey?
I have executive committee meeting on Wednesday.
Jane, P&Z.
No, we haven't met.
Anything about the 33 or any of that stuff you guys do together?
You're forgetting one.
No, I am not. Dublin Bridges.
Yeah, no, we're good. We're.
Is that it? Did I miss anything?
No, you did, you missed one. You missed one.
I did? What'd I miss? CODA. You always have something to say about CODA. How could I forget CODA? Kathy,
Nothing
what's
today,
CODA up to?
Greg. Thank you. Thanks for not forgetting.
That's a gift from Mike for his last meeting.
Best CODA report. Roundtable, Jane.
Forgot me, though, Mayor.
Kathy.
I only have one thing to do, and that is to say thanks to Mike.
Yes.
I've learned just a little bit about what hard work this is, and for doing it for so long and so well. That is fantastic. They always say that you judge somebody by the legacy they leave, and so what you have done here is just amazing. So we wish you well, and we grant you back your Monday nights. And so look for it. Thank you, Mike.
He's already got it all packaged up. All right, Jane is reclaimed for.
Have to, because I did not realize this was your last meeting. So I also want to tell you that it's been a pleasure working with you. And I know how many years and how much time. It's only been 2 years for me, and to think that you've done this that long, and all the effort and all the people that you've talked to and all the policies that you've passed and all the good things you've done for the city is just an amazing, amazing career. So thank you, Mike, from me.
John?
Well, Mike, how many years has it been? When did you start?
36, if anybody's counting.
When did you start city council?
2004.
202.
2004.
It's been a long time.
You see some of those pictures, 1983. You guy was a kid.
Who was that guy?
Yeah, your hair was brown, wasn't it? Hey, but, thank you for all your years of service, and especially the time you put in Washington Township also, and I know you've been through 1,000 decisions, and we had some really tough ones. I mean, I can think back on the recession in 2008 when we had to freeze everybody's wages, and it really wasn't because anything the staff had done, it was just the economics of its time. So it was really a tough period. And then we went on, and I got to say that there's not very many people who say they can help develop an entire city in a short period of time. And you're one of the few peoples in this country that can actually say, you know, I sort of built an entire city, Bridge Street, and had it be successful against a lot of odds where people said we were going to go broke and we were going to lose our rating and all the other kind of things that was set against the project, and it turned out to be just wildly successful because it had to set the economic basis for the future Dublin, which a lot of people didn't realize. So congratulations. Yeah, it was a lot of hard work, a lot of hours. I think, you sat in the back room there, and I got to say that, it's like we got an MBA every 3 months and a PhD every year from some really bright people. Dublin had the money and the power to bring in some really brilliant people to advise us on all that. And it was really an amazing thing. And actually, it was worked out in such a way, and compliments to you and to Greg, who has sat through all that, that no matter what happened, the city was going to be in good shape. So it could have been a monumental another recession, but the taxpayers wasn't going to be off the hook because of all the hard work and diligence that was put into that. It was really an amazing thing. So again, thank you for your hard work, and it was a pleasure serving with you. So, yeah.
I'm going to cut the corner, Christina.
Yeah, I've sat next to you now for 4 years. I know. Thank you. Thank you for your guidance and for your wisdom. You've always been there for me every time we needed to call you, and I appreciate that. I will miss you, but I will miss your Mr. Peanut drawings. I'm sure it's been an honor to serve with you. So thank you for everything you've done.
Thanks, Christina. Chris?
I would echo the comments of my fellow council members. Sorry that I missed your event. I was with you in spirit, but I had committed long before that date was set to attend the National League of Cities, which I would also like to touch on briefly. It was a really interesting time. I will have a report at our next meeting for you all, but it's amazing how many things you learn when you go to things like that, and how governments are funded so shape how they act, and you just get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. So fortunately, we didn't fall in the ugly category. So that's always come back to feeling pretty good about yourself. It's like parenting and going to Disney. And when you think that you maybe aren't a great parent, you take your kids to Disney and you think, hey, I'm not doing so bad. So it's kind of like that, is going to National League of Cities. So
It was, Dana, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you not to forget me, because I know you probably want to give him the last word, so.
I will.
As much as I would love to have the last word for once, but
I will speak my piece, then we'll go to you, and then we go to Mike. It was a really nice reception for Mike. I think there were more former Dublin city managers, more former mayors, and more former council people in one room. You outlasted a lot of them, and it is just a testament to the respect that you have earned over all those years from working with all those people. Mike, you have brought a constant, steady, calming hand on the rudder that is this ship of Dublin. And I mentioned at the reception that the measure of a man's success can really be measured when you see if you left a place better off than you found it. And you certainly have left Dublin immensely better off than as you found it. So I greatly appreciate your service as a resident and as a parent raising my kids here. Thank you for building this hometown of theirs. I greatly appreciate what you have done for us. It has been an honor to sit next to you and to watch what you have done for this community. And I'll miss your advice, I'll miss your guidance, and more than any of that, I'll miss your friendship. So I wish you the best, Mike. Dana?
Thank you, Mayor. I had a few items in packet that I needed to check in on. I hate to take you backwards, but I'll circle you back and get you back on track here. Michelle was kind enough to put in the packet before she departed, and of course, you notice she's not here tonight, the answer to it, but she put it in before she left, which I greatly appreciate. Council retreat goal update, and in that, there were a number of those: debt policy, balanced budget policy, Bridge Street District street policy, timing and triggers for review of community plan, and also external events management scheduling policy, which your CSAC had looked at. All of these are items that we think should be green or finished, and I'm trying to tick these off of the list before we get back into another retreat and my list gets longer again, but wanted to see if I could get your concurrence to consider those complete. I mean, complete in the sense that we have forward action plans and everything and know the way ahead on those items.
I had
Go ahead.
I had a couple of feedback pieces in the, I guess, sort of the economic development area. I think the justice is in there, but I'm not sure the action plan is in there. So, for instance, one of them is, the comment was our request to look at the number and/or types of different businesses in there. And the comment was, well, we were given an update, I guess, as part of the update of the development plan. But that really, I don't think, was the spirit of that. It was more established that ongoing. So I think it captured, but I'm not sure that some of those I could put a check mark and say, done, next to it, or at least from my perspective of what those requests are. So there were a couple like that. So again, I think
So
maybe it's more
were those in the
green area.
under the council goals, or was that under the performance measurement piece?
You know, that was under the performance measurement piece, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so there, I've given you my feedback on that one, yeah, that's where they were.
Got it,
Yes.
and I'll take that back then.
Thank you,
But-
yeah, it was in there.
I have one other comment on the information-only items. I'd like to keep the brick paver intersection maintenance on the topic to be discussed at a later date. The hour is too late, and my brain is not
Sure,
functioning.
we can do that.
But I do want to talk about, I mean, the rapid decline of that, we're going to have to, I want to talk about it.
Okay.
You know, and it really is a maintenance issue too, because when those tires hit those bricks, without the sand being renewed, they crack. So I guess we should have thought about that, I don't know.
Yeah.
My other question is on the blue zone thing. Sounds like, okay, we're going to drop it, or is that still in the game because of the money?
No, you're spot on. That was on my list, but can I ask for your concurrence on the green
sorry.
first?
Yeah.
Does anybody have an objection to Dana treating the greens as done?
I know after all this stuff tonight, you want to come down to this, but
If we do, could we get him in writing why we think they're done? How about we do that?
Okay, I think we have consensus. Thank you for that.
How
I
about within a week?
Good.
Get him in writing why you think it was not done, and if not, within a week, you can consider them.
Okay, very good, thank you. I'll skip the blue zones. Really what we found out is, we thought we had to do a $50,000 raise, do the study, and then get to the next phase, which was the really expensive phase. They came back and said, no, you got to do both at once. So we said, well, we're not going to be raising $1 million to do this thing. So right now, we're just saying, let's just suspend that. We'll look at other ideas relative to community wellness and bring that back to you. We're never going to give up on that. And so we'll work that and come back to you.
Yeah, I was going to suggest is that we could do our own blue zone too, without the big oversight committee that we'd have to pay a fortune to be a participant in. If that's
Call it a green zone or something.
if that's really, of interest to the city council, that kind of health issue.
Thank you. The other one was the Human Rights Campaign Municipal Equality Index. I just wanted to point out that in that index, we've done about all we can do at staff level relative to our internal policies and so forth. I think the next level, if you want to address the index, is something that's more of a community dialogue and some other things that really council will need to take up in conversation. Obviously, something for next year, but you might want to consider a dialogue about that, maybe at a committee level or something, to talk about process and maybe whether or how you might want to undertake such a process. So I'll leave that for another day, but just wanted to plant that seed with you. And then the mayor mentioned the open house tomorrow night. And the last thing I had on my list was also to thank former mayor and Councilmember Mike Keenan for all his great service and support to staff. So on behalf of staff, Mike, thank you for everything that you've done.
Yeah, take us home.
Share a few remarks. Okay, thank you. I should know that by now after 36 years. So anyway, I thought I'd share a few remarks with this council before I ride off into the sunset, which I should see setting into the Gulf of Mexico Wednesday at 5:35. Not that I was counting. And Dublin's an extraordinary community, and Dublin's elected leadership has always been willing to take the risk, we'll put that in quotes, necessary to move to the next level of greatness. A few councils back, one of our members shared a quote during a goal setting that was decidedly short but to the point, and that is, "The big thing is the next big thing." It doesn't sound like a lot, but we really worked to that end. And basically, that quote was encouraging fellow council members to be visionary, which is one of the most important things that you can do. So some of the big things that we've worked on in the past, and other councils, include the rec center, the design and build out of Emerald Parkway, advancing the I-270 interchange, our library complete with a 529 space parking garage, which we worked on for years and years and years. We could only get 3 votes. We could never get to the 4th for a long time. OU's osteopathic teaching facility, parkland acquisition, parkland development, including the latest addition of the Riverside Park, the deck, fiber capacity, and past intensive efforts to plan the development of the 33 corridor, to name just a few big things. And that 33 corridor is probably one of your biggest challenges going forward. We work so hard to develop relationships, and many of those people are now retiring. And unfortunately, one has retired himself, speaking about a Jerome Township trustee, to remain unnamed. Council's job is to formulate policy and to be visionaries. There's much to be done and many big things left to do, such as continued improvement of our zoning codes with a specific emphasis on the historic district, completion of Bridge Park and the Riverside Park, continued strong efforts on the 33 corridor and development of Union County relationships, consideration of the proposed Bridge Park Arena, perhaps a performing arts center, continuing development of high-tech capabilities for Dublin, continued exploration of how the use of data can help council deliver the very best services to both our residential and corporate citizens, and many, many other opportunities, way too numerous. You have a lot of things to do going forward, and those visions, these things that are even unthought of, and we talked about in one of the goal settings, a Dublin University, and it was just one of those wild-eyed things, and all of a sudden, years later, we end up with the OU and the teaching facility. So, what will this council's next big thing be? And it doesn't have to be any of those enumerated. It just could be something that you come up with at your next goal setting. And I'll leave you with these words. Value the incredible staff you and past councils have helped assemble. Value their experience and professionalism, and give them the respect they deserve. It's been a great honor and privilege to serve this special community where my wife Jill and I have lived and raised our family since 1978. And thanks once again for the extraordinary send-off last week. It was way over the top. So many different aspects of that I was totally surprised and did not expect. And I know there were a lot of people involved, and Sue and Nancy Richardson, and everybody really, I think, played a hand, Ann Clark and the clerk's offices. So thank you for all that. That's all I have.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.
10:30.